Okay, folks, hopefully we're back on stream with you just now. Looks like I've got a better uplink from OBS. Hopefully you can hear Amy as well. Let's try again. Third time, say hello, Amy.
Hello, it
Oh,
is I, Amy.
it is I. Excellent stuff. So we can blame that on the telecom operator here. I was getting an uplink speed of, wait for it, 0.18 megabits per second, which for no apparent reason just appeared out of nowhere. So I guess my next door neighbours have got something exciting going on with their internet. Toto says the audio is 5 by 5. Amy could do with another 3 decibels. I think I can do that. There's another 3 decibels, so hopefully Amy's a bit louder now.
Hello.
Awesome. Who have we got in the chat? So yours 18, yours 182. Thanks very much. Glad to be back. It's been a while. Roslo, good to see you joining again. And Toto, obviously. How could we have a stream without Toto? Winston, good evening, sir. Congratulations on the epic Cessna 172 trip. I cannot put into words quite how jealous I actually am about that. And Winston, yeah, I was away when the thunderstorms were here, so maybe that's what the issue is. The sneaky Danish, thanks for joining as well. And if any of the new subscribers to the channel are here, any of the new followers, thanks very much for the follow, much appreciated. So we're here with Amy, one of the developers of the Q400 by FlyJSim. Amy spent a lot of time developing the UNS-1 in the Q400 to make it an exciting sim experience. How would you describe that development process, Amy? Was it enjoyable? Was it hard work? Was it frustrating?
Uh, yes. So all of the above, really. It was enjoyable, and I mean, it still is. Like, it's not done. There's still things I'd like to add and everything. But it also gets frustrating and hard work quite often and quite quickly as well. I mean, I got into it. This is the first time I programmed anything for the flight simulator.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a steep learning curve as well.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of programming on the like aside from that before, but yeah, that was my first time learning about navigation databases and all that. So it was,
Yes,
yeah,
I can
it was an
imagine.
interesting.
It does seem like an awful lot of work when following the development process of it, but it's really nice to see an aircraft in the sim that uses something other than the stock navigation solution. One of the things I say quite frequently is it's nice to have a new experience in the sim, not just flying another airplane or not just flying a different visual model that flies like anything else in the sim, but actually flying something brand new. And that's the experience you get with the Dash, thanks in no small part to having this UNS-1 fitted to it. I've spent a lot of time flying as a passenger on the Q400. I think I've mentioned a few times that it's the aircraft that kept my family together when I was commuting for about 7 or 8 months, basically coming home on a Friday evening and going back to work on a Monday morning. So I've got hundreds of hours down the back of a Dash 8. This particular Dash 8 I've flown on a few times, looking back through my photos. And I don't do reviews on the YouTube channel. I don't do reviews on Twitch. I just like to show you the aircraft and fly it and enjoy it, and you can make up your own purchasing decision about it. But I think the modelling on this is really nice in a lot of places. I know there's some little visual discrepancies we can look at, but look at the modelling of the props. It really does look like what I remember the Dash 8 to look like. So it's nice to have it in the sim finally. So let's jump inside. I'm not an experienced Q400 pilot. I haven't flown the Majestic aircraft at all in FlyJSim, and I've had about 3 days of flying the Q400 here. So we're counting on Amy as our designated duty dash pilot to help us out, to show me how to make it work.
That is potentially a risky decision, but I'll help as much as I can.
I'm sure we'll be fine. The focus on the stream is really to look at the UNS and how to operate the UNS and the aircraft, see some of the fun things it can do. The flight we're going to do is from the Isle of Man at Ronaldsway Airport, Echo Golf November Sierra, and we're going to fly over to Geneva. This is a real flight the Q400 did from the Isle of Man. It was a winter charter flight, so they were operating for the ski season into Geneva. it's quite limited in terms of extra payload, the Dash, in terms of extra cargo. So if you've got 72 passengers on board and they're all taking 15 kilo, 20 kilo bags for skiing and a 10 kilogram pair of skis, it runs out of mass quite quickly. So I think on these flights, I never flew on one of them, but I believe they were payload limited. They were just the number of passengers they sold and just put the ticket costs up accordingly, which is very much a FlyB sort of thing to do. So the aircraft is sitting here on the stand. It's shut down. We've got the front left-hand door open. And what we're going to do is load the aircraft up. So it's got this AFB, and if you've followed some of the chat on the Hot Start Discord, I'm not a big fan of AFBs in aircraft because I find that it kind of breaks the immersion a little bit, because what I'm actually doing here is trying to sell tickets for the airplane. But this is implemented really quite nicely. It mostly does what you want it to do. There's just one or two things like the fuel planning, which I'd quite like to see improved later on. But let's load the aircraft up. So I'm going to set it to 60 passengers. As I said, we're kind of payload restricted. And total cargo. So let's say each of those 60 passengers has 15 kilos. That's going to be what? 900 kilograms. So I'll use my mouse wheel to scroll it up to 900 kilograms. And let's say, for example, about 40 of them have 10 kilograms of skis with them as well. So let's bump that from 900 to 1300. So one of the things that it doesn't quite do is stay fully inside the CG. I'd like it to be a bit better balanced as you're winding the weight on, but we can fix that. I'll just put more weight in the forward hold, and we'll take some of the weight out the rear hold and just balance the aircraft that way. So there's a little bit of trial and error. I mean, it should stay just within the limits, but I kind of like it to be a bit more centralized than what we have. How much of the development process were you involved in with the aircraft, Amy? What sort of bits on it did you do, as well as the UNS?
So originally it was UNS only.
Mm-hmm.
When I joined, God, when was that? That was about a year and a half ago, I think. Almost
Mm-hmm.
2 years now. Well, so I started work on the UNS 2 years ago, and I think I joined up about a year and a half
Sure.
after ago. So my work was really mostly UNS. Later in the development, I took over flight director logic as well,
Uh-huh.
because it turns out they're trying to get the explain default flight directors to work with a custom LNAV signal isn't,
Problematic.
if doable, at least essentially you'd spend more time actually tracking the state of the explain autopilot than you would actually like writing your own. So that's
Yes.
what that's what I ended up doing.
Oh, that makes sense. So,
Um,
so better
and
to do it custom.
Yeah, and I lent a hand on some of the propeller electronic controller logic.
Okay.
At least the kind of like a basic kind of like inner loop of it, so the PIDs and everything that actually control the pitch.
I see. So
And
all
some
the
of
nitty gritty technical details of the airplane then?
not even at this point, it wasn't even technical details. It was more just like code things that I knew how to do quickly. So like
Yes.
it was easier for me to just come in and like drop a bit of code for Jack to then build around. And
Ah, I
yeah.
see. Awesome.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I worked on, but I think that was pretty much it. Oh, and the MFD map,
All right.
because that's
Okay.
pretty much, I mean, that's pretty much all FMS driven, right?
Yes.
You get, it essentially gets most of its data, as some of the data coming from the air data computer and from the AHRS, the
Uh-huh.
altitudes and heading reference system, but most of it,
Most of it's FMS.
yeah, location, nav aids around you, airports around you, route, and all that all come from the FMS. So
Sure.
yeah,
Cool. I think the UNS is very nicely done on the aircraft. I don't like to start on a negative, but there's some things about the aircraft that I feel compelled to mention, because I want to help you make your own purchasing decision if you're watching the stream about the aircraft. And it's little things. I mean, it's just a few little things. But for example, it had this opportunity here to give you a fuel calculator. So I can change time en route, but it doesn't change total fuel. It's almost a little bit of guesswork here. So if I know the flight's supposed to be 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I'm going to guess at 3.8 tons. If I go into load summary, you see I can change the route distance, and it's going to change the landing fuel. So it does have that calculation built into it. It does know how much fuel it's going to burn. It does know the time en route, but it just doesn't feed that back into the into the previous screen. And also, as I change the time en route, it's not changing the en route fuel use. So there's maybe a few little bits in there that still need to be fixed, but we can feed those back to the development team and hopefully get something sorted out on that, or maybe I'm misunderstanding how it's supposed to be working. But what we've got at the moment is around about 1.4 tons landing fuel into Geneva, which sounds fine. One of the things it does, which I really quite like, is if I confirm the load, I can then push the start loading button, and it's going to deal with everything outside automatically. It's going to open the doors, it's going to put the steps down, it's going to open the cargo hold, it's going to summon better pushback. There's the fueler as well, and you can see he's going to put his fuel hose into the hydrant, which has appeared here, and then he's going to plug it into the right-hand nacelle and start fueling it. So it's pretty nice that it's got that. I would have preferred to have a target off blocks time rather than just start loading. So, you know, when you spawn into the sim, you say, I want to start at 8:35 and it works from there. But I do like this. It means I don't have to worry about pushing doors and pushing buttons to open doors. You see the flight deck door is all open as well. And that should all sort itself out as we go through the loading process. Excellent. So let's start firing up the aircraft now, and this is where you're going to see my Dash 8 noobness here. It's largely a DC aircraft, I believe, Amy. I think there's only the AC Wild system that feeds into transformer rectifiers, but mostly it's DC. So we'll put the battery master on. This feeds the connects the batteries to the essential buses, and then we'll put the 3 batteries onto the main feed buses as well. Make sure the bus tie is open for the pre-start procedures. Windshield heat, we'll not worry about that just now because it's on battery. I don't want to drain the batteries unnecessarily. But we can do the fire bell checks. We'll check the APU fire bell. We'll check the engines. And for the baggage hold and the aft baggage. Coming down here, flight data recorder. I don't think that's implemented really. It's not that sort of aircraft for this. Cabin pressurization we'll come to in a little bit. We've got lighting up here, and we'll fire up the APU now that we've checked it. So APU control goes to power, and then start. You can see the little built-in self-test that it has as well, which is fairly interesting. So starter fires up, we'll keep working through. Landing field elevation, we're going to Geneva, which is around about 1500 feet. Exterior lights, well, APU is firing up, we'll put the position light on. Here's the APU available, so I'll put it on gen. Come out here, AC, we'll leave the gens on. It's got automatic electrical logic. Is it the EPCU, they call it, Amy? The some electrical power control system? Where it does most things itself?
That's a very good question. I was very far removed from the electrical system, apart from the 2 variables that tell me whether my FMSs have power, so my answer to that is maybe.
Maybe. Awesome. Well, we'll have a look at it as we go. What have we got here? We've got recirc fans we need on. Air conditioning bleeds, we'll leave those switched off just now. We'll use the APU bleed instead, so I'll switch that on. Packs are set to auto. Fasten seatbelts, well, we're still refueling, so I'll leave the fasten seatbelts off, but no smoking sounds come on. We can test the advisory lights here. We'll check the caution lights as well. We'll put the emergency lights to arm, and that should be us on the overhead. Oh, we've got external or APU power now, so let's put the windshield to warm up. Excellent, onto the glare shield now. Taxi and flight. This is the weird thing about the Dash 8. You remember if you've ever seen a Dash 8 taxi out, as it lines up on the runway, you'll see the flight spoilers pop up or you'll see the ground spoilers, sorry, pop up on the top of the wing. And that's when they flick it into spoiler mode. The spoilers into flight mode. Those spoilers pop up. So we put it into taxi mode for use on the ground here. What else do we have to set here? Anti-skid, I think. So anti-skid goes on. There's some other stuff down here as well, but we should probably wake the screens up first of all, allow it to start doing stuff. So you've got this boot up sequence on the screens, which I quite like. Looks fairly alive, fairly realistic there. And we'll put the UNS on as well. 1 and 2. I find it really interesting that the UNS isn't, it doesn't have any proper cross-sync between the two devices, and instead you've got to do a manual cross-fill every time. I think that's a fascinating design choice, and I'd really love to work out what they were thinking when they came up with that.
It's yeah, I think choice is the right word for that. So apparently, I was actually talking after release. We got word of a couple of pilots for airlines that we didn't have, kind of like roster of helpers.
Yes.
That mentioned that their airlines was using the sync modes that I think they introduced in the recent software updates.
Uh-huh.
So you can have some kind of like automatic synchronization, although when you look at the manuals, there's quite a lot of limitations on it and quite a lot of conditions that can cause it to essentially jump and go back to independent units.
I gotcha. Okay.
So my guess is that airlines would rather have something that's cumbersome yet predictable rather than something that's convenient most of the time but can also kind of jump on you and stop working.
Okay.
I'm not too sure.
No, well, that kind of makes a little bit of sense, I guess, that they want something reliable and fairly easy to understand.
But
Pilsner's asking in the chat if there's any roadmap for a single UNS fitted aircraft, so where you'd have one UNS driving both.
So from the FMS perspective, that's a really easy change to make. From the plane perspective, I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Jack. But,
sure.
Yeah.
It's almost.
That'd be something that
you could even simulate that yourself just by not switching on the number to UNS and setting the nav source to FMS1, I'm guessing.
So to a degree, the only thing that won't work in that case is the route on the right-hand side MFD.
Okay.
Because that's the one thing that's hardwired in a real plane. So there's obviously the autopilot and the HSIs are linked to both FMSs, and you can select which side you want to display. But on a dual FMS installation, each MFD is hardwired to its on-side FMS, so you can't display route data from
I see.
cross-side FMS.
Okay, that makes sense. So it would need a little bit of work behind the scenes, but it's something that you could... maybe a suggestion box item then.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, from the FMS code perspective, it's maybe 3 lines of code that I can think
that's what I like to hear. Something straightforward. Yeah. There's an auto feather test we've got to do with the aircraft as well, Amy. Is that something we do on the stand or when we push back? What do you think?
On the stand, I believe the conditions for it is both props need to be at or below feather. So yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So I push auto feather then, and we get auto feather test in progress. It's doing the up trim.
Yep, you'll see it go through its
wall. Auto feather arm. Hey Captain Crash, thanks for joining the stream. Glad you made it. We had some technical issues at the beginning, so our loss is your gain. And Kuri Gohan, what other aircraft commonly had the UNS fitted? I think it's been fitted to lots of things, lots of bizjets, citations, that sort of thing. The Avanti 2 had it as a single install, I believe, in some cases.
Did it?
One of the Avantis has. Maybe it's not the 2. Maybe I'm confusing that with the Pro line.
That's interesting.
I'm sure it's been fitted to one of the Avantis, though.
Excellent. I've definitely seen installations where you have the Pro line EFIS by UNS FMS, which I always found strange, but yeah.
That's weird, isn't it? Right, we're fueled and we've got passengers on board, so fueling's complete. They're still loading the bags. Let's put the fasten seatbelt signs on so I don't forget that. And then we'll focus on the interesting bits here, getting the FMS up and running. So it's flashing a message here, and before I click the button, Pilsner's going to know exactly what the issue is when I click this, but the database is expired. So, I mean, you can see it here, 6th of October. I only update my database maybe once every 6 months because I'm kind of lazy like that. But the great thing is that Amy's UNS uses the stock X-plane nav data, so you don't have a separate set of data to mess around with like some other aircraft out there. So if you update X-plane, it's updated automatically for you. It's how all add-ons should be, in my humble opinion, but not all of them are like that. So let's load the route. We are going to go from the Isle of Man to Geneva, as I said. Here's the departure charts for the Isle of Man. There's none. There's nothing on there. So it's very straightforward in that case. We're just going to load the first waypoint. One of the things that I found really fascinating is that there is no scratch pad on the UNS. You've got no blank space at the bottom here. So before we start typing, we've got to open the field and start typing into it. And it's Kelly is the first waypoint. Now, you can also click down here, there's a little click spot, and if I click it, you should be able to see the FMS1 flashing in the corner there. That's it, captured keyboard input, which makes it a little bit quicker to put some entries in. Pilson's going to remind me when the cycle rolls over. He'll never let me forget that, every single time. Loading the airways is interesting as well. So we use the list button, and then we tell it we want airways. So you can choose airports, NDBs, intersections, BOR, and PLT is that pilot waypoints or something like that?
Yes, that would be yes.
Excellent. But I'm going to use airway, and it's the Lima 10 airway. And you'll notice that this box in the middle, it's got a 1 next to it. So we're not using the line select keys to choose. We're simply going to type in the number that corresponds to it. So, you know, a little bit old technology, but you get used to it very quickly. We're going to follow Lima 10 to Wallasey, the WAL. That's point 11, enter, and then it's just a case of ripping through them. So it's Lima 151, which is airway 2. That goes to Midhurst. Midhurst is number 5 there. And then we're going on the Upper Lima 612, which is waypoint 6. One of the doors is closed. We're going as far as Resmi, which is waypoint 10. And finally, we're going to go on the Upper Mike 975. There we go, number 3. We're going to go to Alusar, 2 there. And then we're just going to load the arrival into Geneva. So easiest way to do this is to click Menu, Arrive, and then up here we just put in LSGG.
Tow is driving up.
Oh, excellent. One of the things I kind of wish, let me just come off the keyboard there just now. One of the things I wish they'd done is put a little audio announcement in to say, like the dispatcher saying, okay, that's all your passengers on board, all the bags are on board, you're ready to go. It would be pretty nice to have that. But you can see on the door screen it's all closed up, and you do get better pushback reminding you that they're on the way as well. So Geneva will accept its runway 04 we're going to land on. I'm going to use the Lusar arrival, which is down here, number 13. That might be unlucky. Don't want that to be unlucky. We're going to fly the ILS DME approach onto runway 4 and the transition via Indus. We should have our flight plan there. So what I can do...
all doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
He's excited, he's ready to go. I'm not quite ready yet though. All that chatting and technical issues at the beginning, eh? We'll load up the fuel as well. So now that this is all finished here, we've got a zero fuel weight of 24.3.
Release parking brake when ready to start pushback.
So 24,300. And it's asking for the fuel on board. We should have 3.8. We've got 3.8, so I'm in kilograms. So that's 3.8 tons, 3,800 kilograms. Gross weight is 28.1, which kind of matches roughly with that. We can put the other stuff in as well, just simple figures like, I don't know, a ton for the alternate. And it doesn't have final reserve, so I'm going to use the hold figure for final reserve, 0 for the extra, and that should feed into fuel planning. And we'll simply do master cross-fill from FMS1, and that should hopefully receive everything. Angry tow driver. He's not angry. He's just ready to go. He's just excited. He's like, I want to push the dash. So when you do the master cross-fill, you get the fuel and the flight plan. You can also on menu cross-fill the fuel separately, and on flight plan cross-fill the flight plan separately. So that's all fairly straightforward. I'll flash this message off as well. And we are pretty much there. We need to set up the autopilot for the departure. So it's runway 26 we're going to depart on. All I want to do is click the toga buttons here. Sorry, let's do standby first. We'll bring the flight directors to life, and then the toga buttons. So I've got wing level and go around. I'm going to set my altitude to 5,000 feet. I don't know what Ronald's way we choose. 5,000 seems reasonable. And the button of impending doom here, Alt select. If you don't push that, it will not capture. It'll blast right through. So it's not like an Airbus where it will automatically capture the altitude every single time. It'll just go straight for it if you don't do Alt Select. I'm going to set my course, or my heading, sorry. I'm going to put the runway heading, so let's have 260, give or take. I'm going to put it into heading mode as well. Some airlines don't allow this, some airlines do allow it. For the purposes of the sim, heading select is fairly straightforward. And we've also got the VOR selected on the number 1 system and ILS on number 2. So we're going to change that to FMS as well. So look, the nav source is up here, FMS1 and FMS2. They're both navigating to Galley. So we can see that the doors are closed. I'll put that screen onto nav. We need to leave the electrical screen up for the time being. And there is a checklist in here. We could have a look through the checklist, but we've got Amy. We don't need a checklist.
I was gonna say, I found a PDF checklist online that I can read to you if you want.
Should we try it without and we'll see how far we get?
That sounds good.
Might just be some fun involved in that. We'll have a look at the checklist when we get airborne. I'm conscious it's a long flight, so we can have a look at the checklist feature, because it's actually, I think it's pretty nicely implemented here. So for the start, we are already on the APU. That's fine. So we're going to turn the beacon light on. It's the red beacon light. And we're going to come down onto the, what would you call this here? Is this the radio panel? There's a special name for it, and I can't remember what it is.
ARCDU.
ARCDU.
ARCDU, which stands for something radio control display unit.
Okay.
Advanced?
Advanced is the perfect name for it. It's quite complicated, so let's go with advanced. So I've got my transponder code in there. The transponder's on, the beacon's on. We're going to turn the APU bleed off for the push, and I shall find out if Mr. Better Pushback knows where he's going. I think he does.
Cockpit. Please show me where you want to go.
Let's go there. Parking brake released. Why would they not allow you to set heading on departure, Le Capitano? I don't know for the dash. So with the G1000, it would latch the flight directors in the turn direction. In a very early version of the G1000, it would latch the flight directors.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
So if you put the heading hold on the ramp, and then you made a 270-degree turn, you might be looking for maybe a 10-degree right turn on the flight directors, but actually it would give you 350 degrees left, which is not what you want at all. So on early Garmin's, you would only select heading when you were on the runway, or when you were just lining up on the runway, to avoid that confusion. I don't know if it's the same on the dash, but maybe it's just some airlines have got weird rules.
If I remember properly, the way it's coded, at least, it should, you should be fine, because it might latch, but by the time you actually line up with the runway, you'll be close enough to the actual heading that you've selected that it should cancel the turn lock, basically, and go back to...
That makes sense, eh? So it should be safe, basically. And we can take off in LNAV as well, that's completely okay. The good thing is, starting the engines is dead straightforward on this aircraft. We're going to start... Which engine should we start first? 2 or 1?
So Flyby would usually start 2 first, because even with the shortest taxi on Earth, they would still taxi out on 1 engine and start the number 1 after.
Of course they would. There we go.
Operation complete.
And you do not want to taxi to do a single engine taxi on number 1, because I believe the emergency brake pressure... No. The hydraulic circuit that powers the main brake pressure
would
not be pressurized, I believe.
I see. That makes sense.
Which is not ideal.
There we go. So, first one's up and running. We'll start number 2. I will start number 1 just because I'll keep it straightforward. So select 1, push start, and all we're looking for is an indication on the RPM here, and then we lift the number 1 in from fuel off to start feather, and you can see this nice pop-up that comes up for the
So is disconnected. A bypass
levers.
pin has been removed. Hand signal on the right. We'll see you next time, and have a safe flight.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Have a good day. I'm talking to myself now. That's crazy. So one of the things, I do like this pop-up for the thrust levers, but it does some odd things. and we'll have a look at that. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just switch it on momentarily so you can see it. He's gone, he's waving at me, so with that in mind we'll put the thrust levers up from start feather to max. There's quite a few items to do now, all the way up here. That should get our AC generators on as well, because they're driven, they don't have a constant speed drive, so they're frequency wild. You can see as the props come up, the AC generators spring to life and make sure that we're not rolling forwards. With that in mind, we can turn off the bus tie switch here. We'll put the windshield heat to on. I'll put the pitot heating, standby, and 1 and 2 on. Don't need to worry about the wipers, that's all inconsequential. We'll shut down the APU. Come up here, we'll switch on the bleeds. I'll leave it in minimum for the time being. Down here, we'll set the fuel pumps, auxiliary fuel pumps on. The standby hydraulic, the PTU control. I'll set the flaps. And the other thing we've got to do is to open the hydraulic number 3 isolation valve. See, the hydraulic system comes up, and then if you watch over here, we'll do a flight control check on the elevator only. So make sure the elevator moves with the number 3 system pressurized, and then we'll turn off the number 3 system again. Excellent. With that check done, we can put the first officer onto the nav display as well. So one of the things I mentioned was this ghost display, and the way it pops up. It's pretty good having it pop up, and it shows me where my aircraft is maybe a little bit, where my thrust levers virtually and my physical levers are not quite aligned. So very common on some of the other aircraft you've seen as well. But if I push the power lever all the way forward, you see my power axis gets stuck at this point here. So I'm pushing my physical hardware all the way forward, and that's actually the gust lock. So it shouldn't really be the physical axis that's restricted, it should be the simulated axis. Just a little thing on there. I'll also put it to fade away, and you'll see that when it gets stuck by the gate, it doesn't pop up. At the moment I find that quite annoying, because I really want to see that my levers can't go any further. I want it to pop up to remind me, but it doesn't do that just now. So that's another thing that I'll feed back to FlyJSim, and hopefully they'll take that on board. Cockpit lyrics, yeah, thanks for joining the stream. It's been a while. I've had real work to do for a while, but it's nice to be back streaming. Such a nice airplane. Great to have Amy on the voice as well. And Intel effects. Can we explain what's the point of messing around with the hydraulic 3 system and the elevator check? Do you know anything about the hydraulic system, Amy?
Not too much. I'm not actually sure. Like, I did not actually realize that you had to do that test until 2 days ago when these people actually started doing it.
Right, okay.
Because I've been trying it my own way, which is extremely incorrect for sure.
I see.
The whole time in testing. I want to say there's something to do with the elevator using the number 3 hydraulics as a backup system, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I don't know, to be honest. I'd need to look it up, Intel effects. I'll try and find the answer for you, and I'll message you on the Discord. How about that?
There we go. We've got an answer from Tuber Flight saying the hydraulic system 3 drives elevators in case of complete failure of systems 1 and 2.
Alright, okay.
If that happens, it's about there. Yeah,
That makes sense. So when you switch on, is it possible to lower the engine sound a little bit? Yes, I can do that. Let's turn that down a little bit for you. Hopefully that's a little bit better. And Amy is a little bit quiet as well. I think I can turn that up a little bit further. There we go. Just let me know if you want that changed any further. Hey, Dimitri.
1, 2, 1, 2.
I haven't fixed my views yet for there. But having this throttle lever in the disc mode, where it's basically just controlling, it's like beta, I'm guessing, it makes it very easy to taxi. You don't really need the brakes at all to taxi out. You can go forwards, you can stop with the power lever, which is very straightforward. Now the parking brake's off as well. You notice I just clicked the takeoff warning test, just to make sure there's nothing exciting going to happen there. I'll put the auto feather on, taxiing out as well. And that is pretty much most things we need done. I'm going to cross an active runway, so I'll go from red strobes to white strobes, just as we cross. Again, we'll have a look at the checklist when we get airborne, because there's a lot of nice things on there. If you're a prospective customer, you might want to have a look at that. This is the default Isle of Man scenery here, so we'll just look outside for a moment and we'll pretend that there isn't a runway sign, nor indeed have they laid grass over the taxiway. Almost like the Dash 8 was built to do that, eh? Excellent. We'll go back to red strobes for the time being. I'm missing the V-speeds. You're right, I was too busy talking. Let's click the V-speeds on. There we go. So, I believe that you can set the V-speeds manually. There's a click spot to do it in here. It's one of the things I'd really like to have on the EFB as well. I think that would be a useful thing as an EFB calculator. My rotate speed is 129, my V2 is 133, and we'll be climbing at probably 143, 153 initially on the climb out. Thanks Esther, nice spot. If 1 and 2 systems fail, the hydraulic 3 pump will come on automatically, but it's checked by the manual switch. Ah, okay, so you're basically checking with the switch that the system comes to life and you get pressure in the system. That makes sense now. In the current version, there's a little bit of an issue with the tiller as well. I've got a separate tiller axis. If you find that your tiller isn't responding to what you're doing, just move it a little bit slower and it should all work out. That's already been fed back. So approaching the runway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gust locks off. I'm going to verify the roll control now. So looking at the spoiler axis there on the spoiler control on the MFD. Make sure we get full movement on the spoilers. We've already checked the elevator. And once we've done that, I'll flick the spoilers to flight. So you see the pop up now. You get the red light. And it's fairly common, as I said, to see Dash 8s taxi onto the runway with the spoiler boards up. What else do we need to do? We'll put the landing lights on. We'll put the strobes to white. One more. Very small click spots on the airplane at the moment. We'll switch the bleeds off. And quick check in here. So we've got the spoilers, we've got appropriate FMAs, we've got auto feather select, we've got flaps, we've got the pumps. Yeah, I think we should be good. We're set in trim as well. Excellent. See anything we're missing, Amy?
Not that I can think of, no.
Excellent.
I believe we're fine.
I don't want to have to hold you personally responsible for all the impending disaster. We're going to fly ahead to 2,000 feet, and then we're going to make a left turn onto a roughly southerly heading, and then we'll pick up the FMS navigation. I do love the sounds on this aircraft. It sounds like the Dash that I remember being a passenger on. I don't love the fact that it flashes the caution light every single time you do anything, but I guess that's what the real thing does. So I'm just going to line it up here, and at the moment, because it's got this little tiller thing, I'm just going to look down here. I'm going to make sure my tiller is centralized, and then we should be good. Excellent. Well, off we go. There's another gate on the power levers, so I'm going to apply power looking down here, which is probably not a good practice, but just so you get the idea. I push my lever forward, it gets the gate, and then I lift my toggle reverse and it comes through the gate, and then I push it to flight rating. So toggle reverse is all you need to get over the gate. There's 70 knots, 80. V1, rotate. Positive rate of climb, gear up. And I'll just increase the pitch beyond the flight directors to basically zero out the airspeed, so 150, 152, that's fine, that's plus 20. I'll trim it for that. Climbing quite happily. And this is a very heavy Dash 8 today on the way to Geneva. There's 1,000 feet, I'll just lower the nose, I'll put it back on that go-around, flight director target, I'll put the autopilot in. Once we're above the final bug speed, plus 5 knots, I guess. Bring the flaps up, and I'll bring the power levers back to the climb position. With that, we'll put the bleeds on, go to normal, disarm auto feather, and then I'll switch into vertical speed mode and I'll lower it down. I'm looking for 185 initially. There's 2,000 feet, so I'll spin the heading round onto 170. And we're climbing away in the Q400. It's one of these airplanes that I really like flying it in the sim, and it's very similar to the Saab 340 by Leading Edge Simulations, in that it's very easy to get started with. It's a very friendly aircraft to get going with, and to be quite honest, if you do some of these procedures out of position, it won't really catch you out. It'll do what it's supposed to do for the most part. Has MD in the chat got the aircraft? Is MD flying it at the moment? Dirac37, thanks for the follow, and Ensign Wesley Crusher, much appreciated. Yours, you've got it. Excellent. So there's 1,000 feet to go. You get the beep from it. I'm just going to leave it in max climb, and you'll see what happens, because obviously it's manual thrust. So once it goes into alt, it lowers the nose by itself. It's not auto thrust, although it's in a rating gate. It doesn't have any concept of auto thrust. So I just need to pull the levers back slightly. We'll aim for about 55-60% at this point. Then we'll do some UNS goodness here as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for direct to Galley, so direct enter, just like a Garmin, and we'll put it into nav. Round it goes. And Amy, I think it draws the waypoint ahead so that it can do a little bit of turn anticipation as well, is that correct?
It does, however, I found it to be a bit tight on the anticipation in the last few builds, so I need to have a look at that actually.
Sure. We can just centralise, we just do direct enter again and all as well. And at this point you can see that because I did the direct on FMS number 1, FNS number 2, FMS number 2 is all the way over here, so you'd really count on the first officer to do the same direct to, and it will get there as well. So there we go, 220 knots. Hopefully by this point we get further climb clearance. Let's go all the way up to 25, which is our cruising altitude. So 250, alt select. Now if I just go straight into IAS mode and scroll it back to 185, we're going to get quite the rate of climb. So my preferred way of doing this is just VS. So I'll just set VS plus 2,500, and then I'll ease the levers back into that rating. You see the pop-up comes up when it gets into the rating. I think it should pop up when it gets to one of the gates as well, but maybe that's just personal preference.
So another way you can do that transition is to just get it into pitch mode, which is what I've been doing quite a lot. Just pitch mode 10 degrees, and then when the speed bleeds off to the point where you want to be, you can just switch to IAS.
Yes, that makes sense.
But I mean, it's 6.5 a dozen really.
Yeah, no, that I do like pitch mode as well. There's another aircraft I'm flying at the moment that uses the pitch mode quite extensively, and it's quite alien to me because the Airbus doesn't have such a thing, but it's nice to see it, and it actually works really well. I can probably switch off the standby hydraulic and the PTU just now. I'll leave do I need the fuel control at the moment, or the fuel pumps at the moment?
I believe you turn them all off at the same time.
Excellent.
So if I remember properly, the procedures I've seen pilots use is at acceleration altitude, do the flaps up, props 900, switch the bleeds back on, and then turn off all the auxiliary pumps basically. So PTU,
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Is a proper Dash H Toro series on the cards right now, Dimitri? I'm not sure. There's a lot of potential in this aircraft. Some of the systems elements on it, if you pull on the threads, it can fall apart a little bit quickly. But really, it's not that sort of airplane. For me, it's an airplane that I just wanted to fly and have fun with, rather than something to really get to know very well. I'll think about it. I've got the 747. I've got one more video at least on the 747 to do, and then another long-term project coming up. But I'll think about it. It's a very easy, friendly aircraft to fly, I think. So through 100, we're going to go to what, 210 knots for the climb now. So I'll just lower the vertical speeds. I'll switch the lights off. Of course, you don't need to wait till flight level 100 for the lights. We're not in America, so we don't need to worry about that. And there's something else I was going to do up here. Oh yes, seatbelts. Fasten seatbelts go off. I read that, Captain Crash. Every time I get close to making a video to finish the 747, it gets changed and something else happens. There's indicated airspeed and 210. There she goes, climbing away. It's a super looking thing, the Dash A. I love how it looks lean and muscular in the same image. It's difficult to explain. Long-term project. Okay, 650. Oh, well, I didn't say that. You're inferring that, eh? With Rico, that 10k lights thing is only for part 121. I don't know. I can't remember the part numbers for the FAA stuff. Captain Crash can almost certainly clarify that. But yeah, on the Airbus, the lights protrude into the airflow, so you turn them off quickly, and that reduces your drag. Airline ops, I gotcha.
Yeah, I always found the Dash to be a weird-looking airplane, especially when you look at it with the gear down on the runway.
Yes.
Because, like, it's one of those. There's few high-wing planes with the gear coming out of the engines.
Yes, that is right. It's weird, isn't it?
And it kind of looks like you took a plane and chopped off the landing gear, and it looks really strange. It looks like it's just suspended on it. It's got really weird.
Yeah, I think it's a unique looking thing. I remember the Dashies. The first Dash I flew on was a 200 series, and it just looked this little happy airplane from a cartoon series. And then the 400, the Q400 showed up, and it looked far too big for a Dash. You know, it's a Dash, but it's like it's got a little bit too big for its own shoes. But after a while, you know, you grow to love it. I tell you what, I'll show you the view that I like. Because as I said, I've got a personal reason for loving the Dash. If I get to this position, I don't like there aren't people in the cockpit. I'd like to see people in the cockpit. But imagine you're sitting on the ground and the propeller isn't turning, because otherwise it's pretty scary. But this, for me, this is the I'm going home view. You know, just before you get up those stairs, you're going home. And that's the best thing about the Dash. Excellent. I've got to centralise the heading bug manually all the time we fly this.
Yep.
And what else is interesting on the FMS? We've got the fuel predictions. So, fuel predictions are fairly interesting. If I bring those up, in fact it's on the, is it Perf that shows it? There we go.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit, Amy, about how the fuel predictions work on the FMS? Because it's not quite as you might expect with some other aircraft.
Sure. So, unlike a Honeywell or Thales or Collins, even FMS, like the FMS isn't really connected to the fuel system of the plane at all. It doesn't even really know what your cruise altitude is going to be. So it pretty much always assumes that you're going to keep flying the flight plan at the true airspeed that you have right now and the fuel flow that you have right now. So basically when it gives you that's actually why on the page you can see it says now and overhead Geneva and not at Geneva.
Yes.
Because it doesn't really plan for when you're going to start descending and actually reduce power and therefore fuel flow. It just assumes that, yeah, you're going to keep guzzling fuel the exact same way you're doing it right now on the climb. So you can see actually the fuel on board line at Geneva right now is positive. But I've had pilots tell me that on climb on a sector where there's either no alternate or the alternate is very close to destination.
Yes.
That will actually go in the negatives and flash red, and that's normal. You just say, oh, that's fine, it's because we're in climb. And the second you actually level off in cruise and you reduce power, or you gain airspeed at the same power, you find it goes back into the positives, but it's not very clever.
No, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's basically just looking at the current indicated fuel flow and working out from there.
Exactly, yeah. You can see, so you can see actually more data, I believe, if you go into fuel pages, so if you
yes.
click fuel.
Yeah, this one.
And then click it again. Yes. There you go. If you click it again, you can sequence through the pages and you'll see essentially all of the various information that it can give you.
It's fairly detailed, isn't it? And you can change your passenger weight. There's a menu item for that. Sorry, Toto wants to see the reduced climb mode or the quiet climb, so we'll do that before we get too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the thrust levers back. Keep an eye on the engine display here. It's max climb just now. If I nudge it back from 900 into 850, I can then push the rating button here for max climb again, and that gets me basically a quieter climb, 850 RPM on the props. It'll impact the climb rate a little bit, but it shouldn't matter too much. We'll see how far we get with that.
It matters more in the low levels and the high levels, because in the high levels, max climb and max cruise are very close to each other in terms of torque and power.
Right.
But if you're at 5,000, like apparently some operators climbing 850 the whole way, or at least once they're above the safe minimum self-altitudes, and at 5,000 I believe the max cruise must be at 50% torque, while max climb is at almost 100%.
Goodness.
In 850. So that's quite, if you forget to click that button, you're going to get quite a degraded climb performance.
Yes, I should imagine. Goodness me. It's a lot easier if you're familiar with the Saab 340 from leading edge simulations. The power management on the dash is a whole lot easier than the Saab. I mean, you'd expect that. It's a much more modern aircraft. Is it the Pratt & Whitney 150s it's got on this aircraft versus the CT7s on the Saab?
Yep.
It's a lot more modern design. So you've basically got takeoff, climb and cruise, and down here you've got climb and cruise ratings, so it'll do it automatically when you move the prop lever. If you want, you can have, for example, 900 RPM and cruise thrust, or 850 RPM and climb thrust. But otherwise, just moving the condition lever is all you really need to do with it. It's very straightforward compared to the Saab. And the automation is fractionally more capable as well, with it having the FMS nav integrated into it. So what have we got there? Q and Q400 stands for quiet. This is common knowledge. What isn't common knowledge? The 400 signifies what considers. Yeah, exactly, 400 decibels, and that's at a good 1.5 miles, 2 miles total. That's not being inside it. Yeah, it is noisy. If we go into the cabin, if you were in the cabin for real, well, let's have a look on the outside first of all. There's some interesting things on the outside. I'll make sure. Do you know what? I'm just going to nudge it back into the. Shall we go back to? We'll go back to 900 climb. There we go. Let's go outside. I don't know why I don't have ride along with a number assigned to it, but oh well, there we go.
Oh, by the way,
Yes.
just realizing now, but if you want a slightly higher climb past flight level 150, you can usually go into pitch hold at 5 degrees up.
All right. Okay.
And I'll give you slowly descending IAS, but pretty much like what the standard climb profile looks like.
Okay. So if I click the IS button, that goes into pitch hold, and then is there a sync on the control column where I could there's tactile control steering? Does that work? Or is that not
it's not implemented at the moment, but
okay. So I just nudge it on
the solution is to just use the wheel to just nudge it.
There we go.
5-6 degrees usually it does about the trick.
Excellent. I'll keep coming back to keep an eye on that, but let's go external and go right along. So because it's a turboprop, if you can see this here, can you see this doubling panel on the fuselage here? It's on both sides. You see the outline here? Does anybody in the chat know what this is for? You can probably guess if I show you this way. There's a skin doubling panel there. Body armour. Close, yeah, that's right. Ross Lowe says, I've always thought the Saab was fairly straightforward. If you disregard dealing with CTOT, props back to 1213. Yeah, that's right. It's once you get used to it, it's fairly straightforward, but it's not quite as simple as just chucking the lever into the detent and going flying. Yeah, it's to do with the ice, Winston and Toto. The props, when they get ice, they throw the ice off, and those panels are basically attrition panels. So the panel itself is, and you can see how it's attached. I can't remember how they're attached on, but it's easy. Well, it's not easy. It's less involved to remove this doubling panel than it is to repair the skin underneath. So once the damage on this panel gets to a certain point, it can be blended out or it can be replaced, rather than having to fix the fuselage skin. Hey John O. Livingston Seagull, hope you're having a great evening. Nothing's going to save you in a blade separation. No, that's true, Captain Crash. There was a fairly tragic, was it Saab 2000 in Alaska, not that long ago, had a blade sep event on an overall.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's pretty horrible, really. But that's one of the things. But if you're in the cabin between the props, that's where the noise really is on the Dash 8. If you were a frequent traveller, you learn to try and avoid the rows where the props were. It gets very loud. Of course, I like sitting there to get pictures of the nacelles, you know.
I was gonna say I'd be there to get a good view of the props going into reverse.
Exactly. And also, you can see the gear so clearly on the Saab. And it's got, is it carbon metallic brakes it's got? So when the brakes come on, you can see sparks, you can see glowing from them. And on the takeoff
Really?
roll, you can see little sparks coming off the pads where they're still skimming the surface a little bit. Yeah.
I had no idea. Well, I only flew in a Dash twice, I believe. And I was in the very last row as well, so not the ideal
Not the ideal space to spot it.
Yeah.
There's a video on YouTube where one of the wheels comes off during the takeoff roll. It's fairly exciting. Cool, so here we are, we've got 25,000 feet and we're accelerating. So once it gets to about 200 knots, I'll bring the rating lever back to 850 again, and that'll give us cruise thrust. What's the cabin altitude, JSnap? The cabin altitude is, there you go, 8,000 feet. So we'll have a look at this. I don't like pulling too many threads on videos, because the whole point in flight simulation really is to enjoy the airplanes, regardless of what state the airplane is in. And I'm not really going to tell you you should or shouldn't enjoy a particular aircraft. Even if it's the most basic thing in the world, it can be enjoyable to you, and that's all that really matters. I think where it's important for the community, I think what's important for the community is that people are realistic about the state an aircraft is in, because then you can make an informed decision. So I could show you a plane that I'd built, for example, and tell you it's the best thing ever, and then you get that airplane and you think, well, it's actually not the best thing ever, Graham was lying to me, I don't want to trust him again. If I told you that I've given you a basic plane maker airplane and you get it and it's a basic plane maker airplane with sprinkles, then you'll be quite happy about it, I would think. So I'll show you a couple of the things that aren't quite right on the aircraft in just a second, and again, everything that I'm going to show you we can feed back to the developers, or has already been fed back to developers, in the hope that it gets sorted out as well. Wheel falling off the dash was reenacting a rocket launch with unnecessarily shedding unnecessary flight hardware. Yeah, possibly. Did you sort of decompression? So the decompression, that's one we can have a look at, because it's all nicely in the cruise just now. So at the moment we're running on air conditioning, both bleeds are on the air conditioning system here. And here's your cabin altitude and the cabin vertical speed. Now, if you don't know how the pressurization works, basically the cabin is at a lower altitude than the outside of the aircraft, so the cabin is at a higher pressure. The aircraft is being essentially blown up like a balloon to a certain extent. Okay, it's getting a little bit bigger as it's pressurized. But the way the bleed system works and the pressurization system works is it's not a static volume of air inside the fuselage. Rather, the packs push air into the fuselage and the outflow valve lets the air back out again. And the outflow valve is how you regulate the cabin altitude. So the outflow valve opens and closes to regulate the pressure. So it's like me blowing up a balloon and somebody else having a valve on the other side of the balloon, letting it down a little bit. Okay? So if you imagine that balloon analogy, and what I'm going to do by turning the bleeds off is I'm going to stop blowing up the balloon. I'm not going to burst it, I'm just going to stop putting pressure into it. So one bleed goes off. Keep an eye on the cabin rate and the altitude. Second bleed goes off. Cabin rate is now doing 3,000 feet a minute, and we're going to get excess cabin altitude in just a second. You see the differential pressure rising as the cabin comes up to meet the aircraft. There's 9,000 feet. Now, I'm going to put the bleeds back on before that gets scary, and then it goes back down again. So that's not really how it should work. That's not the intent that's not how a pressurization system works. All the aircraft are leaky, right? So the air goes out the outflow valve, but the air also goes out the door seals. It goes out, poorly fitting seals in the pressure vessel. It will escape from the aircraft. There's actually a test that you do when you do a flight test on aircraft to make sure that it doesn't depressurize at too high a rate, to make sure the fuselage isn't too leaky. So it should be around about 350 to 500 feet a minute climb, whereas what we got there was 3,000 feet a minute. So this is basically just exploding the cabin. It's like opening a door in flight and all the pressure escapes. That's one of the things. The dash has got this interesting thing down here as well called the forward outflow valve. They were clearly worried about overpressure on the aircraft, and there's a forward outflow valve which we can tell here is probably an emergency thing, so not to be fooled with. But if I flick it to open just now, and I look up here, you see I've got a controller for the forward outflow valve. So I want the cabin altitude, I want the forward outflow valve open, and this is just it coming back down to its settling altitude. So the forward outflow valve is not simulated on there. We'll put that back. But again, if you're not doing failure modelling, if you're not doing exciting stuff, then don't worry about that too much. It also doesn't seem to have manual pressurization, so if I flick the switch to manual, and then I've got the differential pressure, I can control it in theory, but it doesn't seem to do anything at the moment. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know whether these features are things the model's supposed to have and don't quite work, or whether they're just beyond the feature set for the aircraft. The description on the store isn't very clear about what's there and what isn't there in terms of what's supposed to be simulated. It just says something like very accurate or very detailed simulation. What we got in the chat. Because the cabin's missing one inside the cockpit, so you have a huge leak from the missing cabin. Perhaps. Boarding curtain options instead of boarding doors. That's a potential. Does dump work? Yes, it does total. Up here. Cabin altitude, keep an eye on your cabin rate. Badoosh. There it goes. Back to auto. You see, so it goes far faster when you go into dump mode. I think it's just the natural depressurization rate is a touch on the high side when you switch the bleeds on. That's about it for the cabin pressurization. If you're not worried about cabin pressurization, if it doesn't affect your realism, how you enjoy the aircraft, then it's not a problem. I don't find it too much of an issue because the real thing I like about this aircraft is learning the navigation system, learning this new system that we've got in the aircraft. Here we are. We have successfully transited into Truoth, Great Britain South. You can see that there's been some kind of seismic event just north of Birmingham here. I guess that's, where are we? Is that Shawbury? Shawbury. Yep, 500 to 800 feet per minute total, that's what I'd expect. So Amy, there's some other interesting stuff the FMS does with the heading mode.
Sure.
So one of the things that I found pretty interesting is the fact that there isn't an armed LNAV mode in the autopilot. So let me demonstrate what I mean by there isn't an armed mode, and we can see how the FMS solves that issue. I'll just let it sequence this waypoint so it doesn't get overly confused. And then what we'll do is we'll put it into heading mode. So I go into heading select and I'm going to turn 45 degrees to the left. So on other aircraft, before you engage LNAV, if you push the LNAV button or the nav button, the aircraft will remain in the previously selected mode until the nav mode captures. So it's basically arming LNAV by pushing the button. But the Q400 with the UNS, it doesn't have that. What we do, we turn away from the course, and as soon as I push nav here, it goes straight into LNAV and it turns back on course. Okay, so there isn't a way to fly on a heading to intercept a radial using the autopilot system. It's basically you push LNAV and you get LNAV and it computes its own intercept. But there is a way to do it, and Amy's going to show us the heading mode on the UNS now to demonstrate the same sort of thing.
Sure. So if you go, so right here on the nav page, actually, if you click the first right LSK, so the heading prompt.
Heading, gotcha.
It'll prompt you with a heading, so by default it'll capture the heading that was there when you went into heading mode, but you can type in any heading you want.
Okay, so if I say, for example, let's put heading 180 initially in there, and that'll run us onto basically the track we're on, and then just push enter.
Yep, then enter, and then you have to confirm the direction of the turn again.
Okay, so I've got a right turn onto 180 degrees. So it's now still in LNAV, but it's turning onto 180 degrees because that's what's been commanded on here.
And there's actually a slight inaccuracy right now. When you do this, normally the FMA should switch to LNAV HDG.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I'll need to fix.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah, and so that's basically how you would intercept a leg. But so like you can see right now, actually, it's because we were either too far off track or too far off course.
It skipped tailbutt altogether?
Yep. So that could happen if you were like on vectors quite far away from your route, and then you get sent back and say, oh, intercept whatever airway. I guess that's probably something you'd hear more in the US than you'd hear in Europe. But,
sure. So how I would need to bring VDOC to the top of the flight plan?
Yep, so what you would do for this is you wouldn't go in the flight plan, you would click, so on the nav page, you would select your from waypoints.
Sorry, 1 second. I'll do the from waypoint, yeah.
So if you go, yep, right here.
And just tell it Telba?
Exactly, so number 7.
To VDOC?
Yep, and we'll automatically pre-fill the next waypoint on your flight, or the next leg on your flight plan.
There we go.
And so it's sequenced that leg. So that's akin to the, I think it's on the Garmin, it's called a activate leg, right? You can select any leg on your flight plan and activate that leg. That's pretty much the same thing. And
now I can change the heading to 120. It's calculated the left turn. And what I'll do is I'll put the FMS pointer on here as well, so you can see that it's now pointing on this little circular marked needle here for the next FMS waypoint. That's very similar to what you've seen me do with the stock G1000. But as it comes round, as this circular waypoint pointer here passes the nose of the aircraft, you see it goes from no intercept to intercept available, or intercept. 120 may not be enough. That was a bad guess by me. Let's go for 110. Keep going out a bit further left. I'm doing this very close to the waypoint, so this may not necessarily work out on this one. But you know, plenty of waypoints left. I think it'll work. Yeah, we're going to get there. So, watch now. So as the needle passes the nose, we've got intercept, and I can click intercept now. It says heading intercept, and all it's going to do is on that heading, it's going to pick up the deviation bar, and you'll see command heading will drop out, and it'll go back to flying the navigation course as expected. I think that's fairly clever. I think it's a nice way of working around that particular thing.
It's a workaround, but it works. So I've heard from pilots saying that they use that quite a lot when they're getting vectors to on other approaches.
Yes, I can imagine that would work really well.
Because if you're getting vectors to an ILS, you're going to have to switch to blue needles anyway, so
Yes.
you might as well use the MCP. But if you're getting vectors to an on-off approach, you could actually activate the approach in the FMS, and it will essentially extend the approach course. And so you can just vector yourself with the FMS to that and arm the intercept so that it just gets you on course.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's not the most intuitive thing the first time, but you can get used to flying with it very quickly. I would probably give it another couple of weeks of playing with it, and then I'd be quite happy to fly the aircraft online and be able to do pretty much anything I think the air traffic would ask of us. So it's fairly low workload once you've got it all sorted out. Have a look in the chat here. So JSnap, quite a bit of work went into the modelling of air conditioning and bleed systems on the 732 and 727. No one seemed to care. Yeah, I care about things like that. I care that there's been love put into the model. I do. The 732 is a very pleasant aircraft to fly. I like the way the automation works for the most part. I should probably put automation in air quotes on the 732, but it's nice to fly. Captain Crash thought it was awesome. Over temp on the APU EGT. Yeah, the APU was fascinating on the 727. I liked the way it flickered when it started out, remember as the lights came on. That was nice. As other streams are showing, you have to learn the airplane while streaming. No. No, you learn it first. Of course you learn it first. Excellent. How much time have you spent flying the aircraft, Amy, as well as testing it? You must have done quite a few hours in it now.
I guess it depends. Are we talking flying for testing purposes or flying just for flying?
Flying for testing purposes counts as well.
In that case, probably a few hundred hours now.
You've flown it more in the past 2 years than any Q400 pilot in the world has flown the aircraft in the past 2 years.
Possibly. But what you end up doing is not a lot of full flights, because quite often you'll find something in the middle of your flight and then you have to try and reproduce the error and stuff like that, so you never really quite get to your destination.
That makes sense. Yeah, that part of testing can be quite unrewarding when all you want to do is fly the airplane and enjoy it, and then something comes up. But if MD in the chat's done testing, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a case of you keep working at it till you get it sorted out. I think the UNS seems fairly reliable. It does what you're expecting it to do. It's nice to use, as I said. I do like there's something about the fuel planning on it that just makes me happy, because it's like it's doing the fuel calculation the way that I would do the fuel calculation. It's like, well, 900 kilos an hour, 2 hours to go, 1800. How about that? It's very basic in that respect. You can see it here. So it's now calculating when I get to Geneva, I'll have fuel on board of 1.7, 1.8 tons, and that's dancing around as we go.
The way I like to look at it is the UNS is basically Wish.com pilot.
Yeah, what you ordered, Thales system. What you got,
exactly.
UNS-1. Makes sense.
Pretty much, yes.
The nice thing about it though is you are using this as an information source. So this is helping you do your pilot stuff. This isn't doing the pilot stuff for you. You're flying the airplane, and okay, you're not flying it with this, you're flying it with this, but you're still flying it. And your distance to go, you're not doing it with a bit of paper or an iPad, but you're doing it with this, but you're still doing it. You're not just sitting there going, well, Airbus says I'm going to land with 2.2 tons, so I don't know, lunchtime. It's more involving to fly that way.
Yes, no, for sure.
Yeah, but that's why moving aside from the fact that My personal preference is not to have options on the PFD. This has been fixed, look at this. Inches of mercury, hectopascals.
Oh, hey.
Nice. Autumn, it's perfect. They've fixed everything on that. If we, I like that. Direct feedback does work. My personal preference is not to have this in the EFB, because I want things in the virtual cockpit to be stuff that I'm using when I'm flying. I'd much rather have a pop-up menu for the options, and then I don't need to worry about it. But that being said, that's personal preference. That's not really a valid criticism of the aircraft from me. And stuff like this, where I've got Captain Mal Reynolds and First Officer Zoe Washburn flying the aircraft, that's me being a nerd. It's not for me, apart from a moderate giggle on the stream, but it's nice for some people, and I wouldn't take that away from them. If that's what you like, then that's great. What I want to do with a simulator, what I like to do with simulators, and the reason why my YouTube channel exists, is to introduce sim pilots to how real-world flying actually works, and to just take separate little facets of real-world flying and put it into the simulator. Because I'm conscious that there's lots of people out there that in the sim world that are either looking forward to a career in aviation, or are in the process of starting their aviation career, like Jono, or you've got people that cannot get into aviation either due to social or financial reasons or medical reasons, and all of these people are part of the sim community. So although there's a group of people that wants to take screenshots and go, oh, there's a lovely Q400 cruising over England somewhere in Oxfordshire, I'm guessing. Probably. There's also a group of people that are having a look at what their aviation career either could be, will be, or could have been. And that's what my channel tries to cater for. And one of the things with this aircraft that isn't quite as per the real world, the fuel planning. So we can have a look at that in here. If I select next load. So as I said at the outset, I love the fact that they've done a turnaround in this. I didn't have to close any doors or push any buttons. It just happened. Select the load I wish to fly with on the next flight. So what I'm doing here is selling tickets, and that's something that you have to live with in the sim. That's fine, and it's fairly unobtrusive. I can choose the number of passengers I've got. I believe you can change them, or you can change the loads up here. It's showing you, as you scroll through them, where you've got kids, where you've got male and female. You can change the weights from autumn weights to winter weights and summer weights. So that's really nice. It's a very nicely done part of it. The cargo here, the sliders, when I drag them with the mouse, they don't update automatically. They kind of snap, and that's maybe a technical limitation. This bit I'm not so keen on, because I am not a baggage loader. I'm simulating the role of a pilot. So I want this total cargo slider to keep the aircraft properly in balance. You can see here that if I get it there, you see it's loaded the aircraft outside the aft CG. Now, it might be nice, there might be people out there that want to match it up with a sim brief plan, and they want the load to be allocated this way. But for me, I just want this slider to keep us in balance all the time and not have to mess around with it. But it's a little issue. The thing that I don't like is the fuel planner, as I said before, because for me, there's no reason why this time en route cannot be calculating the fuel for me. Right? The aircraft, as I showed on the next page, the load summary, the aircraft does know how much fuel it's going to burn on that trip because it calculates the landing weight, but it's not giving me any assistance here whatsoever, so I just have to guess at it. What I'd like to see is simply destination fuel and alternate fuel, or destination time and alternate time, and you have the times and you have the fuel burn, or you maybe have the distance and the time and the fuel burn, or something like that, and then it would calculate it for you. So on the next page here, it's got everything it needs. As I said, it knows if your flight is longer or shorter, but it's going to take less time. It knows what the fuel burn is. You can see the landing fuel change. So it should really be doing it on that previous page there. And then as a simmer that wants to learn about the real world, the real way that airplanes work, we can have a chat about taxi fuel and contingency fuel and alternate fuel and extra fuel. That could all be facilitated simply by having a fuel planner that sticks to what the real world works with, as opposed to this kind of semi-fictitious way of doing it here. And that's why I don't like the way the fuel goes. What have we got? JSnap thinks that's hang on, I need to scroll back through the chat because I've been monologuing there for about 20 minutes. Pilsner wants to know about the ND patience. We can ask about the ND in a second. I'm looking forward to seeing shared flights in this plane. I am too, JSnap. I'm looking forward to flying it in shared flight because I think it's going to be a very pleasant experience. What have we got here? Updating the scrolling issue as a result of how the scroll wheel would work. I think it's a bug. Yeah, it could be. I believe the plan was that moving total cargo would keep it in balance. Okay, so if they've aimed to do it right with the cargo balance and it's got a bug in it, then that's fair enough. As I said at the outset, my objective is not to sell the airplane to you, nor is it to put you off the airplane. It's just to show you the aircraft that you get at the moment. If you were to buy it today, this is the aircraft that you get, and I cannot state this strongly enough that I'm having a real blast flying this airplane. It's really enjoyable. It probably helps, as I said, that I've got a little bit of a personal connection with being a passenger on the dash so many times, but it really is a pleasant aircraft to operate. Pilsner hopes to be able to stream it in the new year. That would be really nice to see. Yes, exactly, Pancake King. There's a couple of things like that. Another little thing on a similar vein is the heading. If I be quiet for a second, you can hear the heading bug change. But if I left mouse button and spin it, it doesn't play the click sound. There's just little things like that. But again, that's me nitpicking. That's just a little thing. I wanted to show you the checklist because because we had the technical issues at the beginning, I basically launched into the air without looking at the checklist. Bad pilot. It's quite common to see simulated aircraft release without enough documentation to tell you how to fly it. It's quite hard to get hold of the FCOMs or training material or modern aircraft, as I'm sure Amy knows. It's quite difficult to get material in a usable manner. And when you get the FCOM's like 2, 3, 4, 5,000 pages. You don't really want that. You just want a few pages telling you how to operate the aircraft in the sim. Well, the checklist in this aircraft kind of gets there. There's a little cop-out in it, which I'm not keen on. But other than that, we've got the checklists here, which are very nice. You can click them with the checkboxes. The cop-out is it's got flight deck preparation completed, right? And if I show more info, flight deck preparation, there's nothing in there. But show more info, that's a really nice thing. So if we look at the start approved, engines cleared for start, show more info, it gives me a full description, or enough of a description to get going on how to start the engine. And again, you've got that on all of the checklists. You've got show more info available, and it basically gives you a set of expanded notes for each of the procedures, so you can do it all within the simulator without having to refer to the extra bits of information, extra documents, which is fairly nice. There's some things like after start, so that's okay, taxi checklist. So yeah, it's telling you what to do here. If you've got this aircraft and you're flying it, by all means read through these items and do these items on the after start checklist. When you get to the taxi checklist, read all the items, read what you're supposed to do the ones that you can do right now, and then taxi out and do the others on the go. But don't try and flip back and forth between driving the airplane on the ground and flop it going into the checklist, because that just doesn't work. It would be nice to have audio call-outs for these checklist items, because these are the things that the first officer would be doing for you as you're taxiing out. You can bring up the pad as a external item here. It's just a touch big for my screen, so let me just shrink it down a little bit. But it doesn't stay in sync with the checks you've got on here. I don't know, maybe it stays in sync if you have it displayed on the right hand side as well. But having it popped up is certainly more natural, because then you can at least keep the airplane going in a straight line while you're looking at the taxi checklist if that's what you want to do. But I kind of favour almost like a lightweight implementation of this checklist as almost like a ghost window here, so that if you're flying it by yourself, you can have a semi-transparent presentation of the taxi checks here, just telling you what to do, either that or audio callouts. Jono, what commercial aircraft have I flown? I've only flown the Airbus series, so I've flown 319, 320, 320neo, 321, 321neo. Mostly Europe, although sometimes further afield as well. No Galley snacks for me, Captain Crash. The Galley, oh my goodness, let's go and have a look. We nearly missed something important. I want to show you something cool, because I've been on the jump seat on the Dash 8, and it's not a pleasant place to be. Here's the jump seat here, there's the seat back, and here's the jump seat coming down there, latches into position. So your headrest, your backrest is all part of the door, and then the jump seat flops down here. I think that's pretty clever, and if you let it go, it kind of falls under gravity. You can't throw it, which is, you know, just me being silly. I want to go, get down seat, but it doesn't want to do that. But you can build your own jump seat, which is fairly nice. Let's open the doors, we'll go back. So the Galley on the dash is down the back. It's got a forward cargo hold, and I can't remember if the Flyby ones have got this. But if I open the forward cargo hold, there's nobody here. It's completely empty. So let's not worry about the flight deck door being open. If I open the forward cargo hold, you see you get the master warning for it, or the caution for it, and there's the cargo hold. So I didn't know you could, if they had that fitted, you can get access in flight, but it seems you can. Let's close it up. That's gone. I'll get rid of the caution. Other stuff in the cabin, well, you can open and close the overheads. If you...
I think there might be a fun surprise in the last starboard one, but don't quote me on that.
Let's go and have a look. Oh. No, did I forget the seatbelts? No, they're off.
Oh,
Huh.
That's...
hang on. Let's try no smoking. Wait. Hang on. Fasten seatbelts, no smoking. Back we go. They're both on. Right, fasten seatbelts going off. Ah, man. It's back to front. There's a little bug. We can report that.
Yeah.
It's no big deal, is it?
Is that the one on the ceiling? Yeah.
The ceiling ones, yeah. The one at the front, let me see it. Yeah, the one at the front is correct.
Yeah. And the ones above the seats should be correct as well. I thought I'd check them at least. But...
Yeah, no, I've never noticed that before. No smoking. Yeah, it's just the ceiling one. It does the lavatory as well. I know that people are desperately keen to see the lavatory. Let's have a look in here. Watch this. So, you know what? I'm just going to glitch into the lavatory because it's got a lavatory. It's got a seat. Hang on. Damn you, gravity. You win again. That's not the line, is it? Curse you, gravity. Anyway, close the toilet. There's the latch. Lavatory's latched. Lavatory's occupied. So it's got, you know, neat stuff like that. If JSNAP implements it in shared flight and you're riding along as a passenger, you can quite happily use the lavatory, I'm guessing. There we go.
Come to the sim to reproduce the fantastic experience of waiting in line for the single lavatory.
Exactly. Also, these overhead bins on a Dash 8, they really, I mean, it looks like it may be fairly spacious in here. My rucksack would scarcely fit in there if I had a weekend rucksack packed. You would see some people come on board the aircraft from a long-haul connection with a big, like a Cabin Max bag that is designed for 15 kilos, and it doesn't quite fit. You said
So yeah.
Second
This
lap.
one. I think on this one. No,
Oh, look at
no, I
that.
think there we go. And if you click it,
Where'd it go?
it should go on your dashboard.
Oh, yes. I mean, I was talking about frivolous facilities, but I'm keeping that there now. It has to be there. Has to be there. Listen, I know. Thanks very much for chatting. Glad to see you here. It's like Milkshake on the SR22. That is going to have to stay there now. There must be a key
I
binding.
believe. I don't know.
You mean
I
I'm
think
going to have to go down the back every time?
Delta made the model a while back,
Uh-huh.
and the first time he posted a screenshot in our team channel, the reaction from pretty much everyone was like, "Okay, where can we get like a physical version of that plushie made?"
That sounds like a reasonable thing to do. Should definitely do
Yeah.
that.
Well,
No toilet down the back on the dash. I think you can maybe have it down the back if it's an option. With the flight attendant seat, the cabin crew seat. There's the switch. We're down here. There we go. You can have a seat, or you can have access to the galley, but you can't
that
have
looks
both.
comfy.
I'm imagining a poor hard-working crew would spend a long time on their feet on this aircraft. It's got the steps. Yeah. I don't think... Can you control any of the lighting in the cabin?
I want to say yes. Maybe if you look at there's a cockpit, there's a cabin control panel just near the entrance. There we go.
Okay.
And I think this might work.
Oh, yes. Hang on. The toilet probably a fairly dark place to be. Let's have a look. Lavatory.
Yeah, not seeing a wild difference, but...
Is this the noise system here? NVS?
Yeah, so NVS with the active node and vibration cancellation system, I think.
Okay. You can change the temperatures.
I've asked multiple times, pilots, what does it do? And the answer seems to be nothing. It's just as loud.
That makes sense. Here we are coasting out over the English Channel. Here's the Worthing wind farm below us. Yeah, what have we got? We've got Beachy Head. It's always cloudy in a way. Beachy Head's over here. Shoreham is behind us, I'm guessing. Where's Shoreham? I can see it. Pause. There we go. Shoreham is here. There's Shoreham.
Should have Brighton somewhere around there.
Yeah,
also,
so
right?
Brighton is just along here. There's Brighton. There's Brighton Marina. There's Brighton.
Oh,
Brighton Pier.
there we go.
Yeah. There's the 360 thing. Yeah, nice. That's true of Great Britain Sound. Lavatory light turns off the occupied light forward in the cabin. Oh, really? Interesting. I'd buy that for $1. Pilsner, I'd buy it as well. I mean, Amy, suggest to Jack they get that made and marketed. That's brilliant. The little squishy thing. It's staying here for the rest of the flight. I will buy 2 of them. We could have a stream giveaway if he gets them made. How about that? It looks like the world is ending in 10 miles. Yeah, that's this X-Plane doing its X-Plane thing that it's done for years.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've always had that out over water when there's no terrain in a thing.
Oh, in a tile.
Yeah. But that being said, we may have a glitch. Hopefully not. Let's do the space thing. Oh my goodness, it does look like the world's ending. We'll have to keep our fingers crossed on that one, Toto. The texturing on the plushie is awesome. It's Delta that made the plushie, is it?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, it does look good. That's a nice surprise. Yeah, definitely get those made.
Yeah, like if I can find a way to get those made, believe me, it will happen. Whether I can, well, You always can.
Yeah,
I guess it depends.
find a way, Amy. Find a way. The world is counting on you now to have
As
plushies.
as a wise chaos theory professional once said, life finds a way. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Bernardo, thanks for the follow. Much appreciated. Pilsner wants to know something about the ND. It's to do with the outline. Pilsner, go ahead. Post your message in the chat, and I'll let Amy answer it for you. Captain Crash is showing his age there. I found that movie terrifying. Whilst Pilsner's typing, Jurassic Park. What was it? 1994. I wasn't overly young in 1994. What?
93 even, I believe.
93, yeah. So I wasn't... I mean, I was comfortably into my teens. And those raptors gave me nightmares for about 3 months. You know when the raptor's just there tapping away with his little claw? Horrifying. I mean, terrifying. Really terrifying. I don't understand it. Captain Crash was 6 at the time. Yeah.
I mean, I was 0 at the time, so...
No, I was in my teens. Jeff Goldman, life finds a way. It does. It certainly does. It was the frog DNA, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Amphibians.
That was a demise.
Toto, we're getting old. You just have to face facts. We're getting old. Right, Pilsner says. In fact, Amy, I'll let you read the Pilsner question because he's desperately keen to know the answer to this.
If the outline is for when the terrain is on, which is an up, and then the changes shape with the weather radar, do we have a roadmap on that? So it's on the roadmap. The answer, which is going to be boring, is as soon as I can get to it. The initial kind of roadmap got a bit shaken after release because we had quite a few crashes and really wanted to fix first. I still have a couple of things I'm not quite 100% happy with on VNav, and after that I can actually jump onto, there's a couple of things I want to get to first, so terrain, weather, and web FMC integration are the main ones. I think we'll get back. Oh, and TCAS traffic on the MFD as well. I don't know what Jack is wanting to do with actual alerts and everything, because that's his side of the planes, but on the MFD at least I can display traffic properly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Pilsner? Is that what you're looking for? My understanding, Amy, is that the GPWS system that's in the aircraft at the moment is largely, is it temporary? It's going to hopefully be augmented by the...
So at the moment, I don't know. Jack programmed his own version of it in Lua, in the SASL source of the plane.
Okay.
Because we have to pull in OpenGPWS anyway for lib radio, and I'm going to need it for the terrain database as well. That's something I'd like to... I mean, it's something I've been wanting to contribute to OpenGPWS for a while anyway, just because I'd like to do a bit of open source work.
Sure. That makes sense. That'd be really nice to see.
Yeah, I'd like to add because OpenGPWS doesn't have the logic for the callouts for the non-Garmin systems.
Okay.
So I'd like to add that. I believe it's Honeywell that makes it.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, Pilsner, you're right. The outline is actually left over of when I started, because it's actually also shows you quite well where the clipping area is for the map display, and so I had it as a helper and left it in there, and yeah, once a GPWS terrain comes in, I'll remove it when it's not displayed. I think there was something about a crash in Crossfield that should have been fixed in the latest updates.
Yeah, Johnny Cosmatis, I've heard about that as well. I haven't seen it. I've done a lot of cross-filling from 1 to 2, and I haven't seen the issue. As Amy said, she thinks she's fixed it, but if you've got the most up-to-date version, and you can replicate the crash, if you can make it happen again, then I think the easiest thing to do is to get some screenshots of the flight plan that you've got, so that Amy can actually see the data it's trying to transfer. Because it sounds like it may be something it's trying to transfer, it's not expecting.
And even better, if you have a log, just send me that and I'll get to it.
Excellent. So Martino 141 had the crossfill bug in its fixed form, so excellent news.
Yes, it was. It's boring and it won't mean much without the codes, but basically was transferring data but not invalidating some of the data that's computed every FMS loop, and one of the things was essentially just getting itself into an inconsistent state and not being happy with it.
Yes, that was my understanding of it. Ensign Wesley says TOS seems somewhat buggy right now, it'll go off repeatedly. Yes, I've seen that as well. We'll probably see that on the way into Geneva. It'll maybe give you a terrain call. It seems to be looking at the rate of change of the radar, but I don't think I think it's basically just a bit sensitive. Wilson's also asking, would Jack consider increasing the pixel density of the main displays? I think they're not quite as sharp as they could or should be.
That's something we've discussed actually, just because. So right now, I believe the size on the panel I know the size on the panel texture is their size in real life. So the blurriness will have to do more with the alignment of the shapes and everything than the pixel size. However, ideally I'd like to be able to render it at twice the size, because even if that means we get chunky pixels, but at least they'll look a bit better and they'll look more like physical pixels than right now. And I think some tweaks need to be done to the font as well, which is not quite right, but yeah.
Makes sense, yeah. Yes, so compared to some of the videos and pictures I've seen of a Dash 8, the symbology is there. The information it has is mostly there. But as you said, the fonts and the scaling is perhaps a little bit larger on the simulator than on the real thing. Now, part of this is obviously, I'm looking at it on a 23-inch monitor, so these things are tiny. You know, following the flight directors is fairly difficult for me. I would have to be, well, for it to be about the right size visually where my monitor is on my desk, I would need to be about here to see it at that size. So I can understand a little bit of almost an accessibility allowance by making things slightly bigger, because you are looking at a much smaller thing on the monitor than you would see for real. I mean, it is, if I hold my fingers up, that PFD is 2 inches across, maybe 2.5 inches across, so about 8 centimeters on my screen, which is width-wise, which is a bit small.
I'll feed that back to Jack, because I think that's, I mean, on my side it's easy to do, and I'm sure on this side it should be doable as well. So I'll feed that back to Jack and see if we can, because I'm fairly certain we have the space on the panel texture as well, so we might as well.
Yeah, you may as well do it, absolutely. But the thing is, I mean, I want to be, for anybody that's just tuned into the stream as well, we've had a look at some of the great things with the aircraft, and some of the things that, bearing in mind we're at launch plus 4 days, we've had a look at some things that aren't quite as great at the moment. The reason, let me start that again. When you get an aircraft that has got things that are not quite right with it, if people bring them to your attention, if people bring them to developers' attention, it's generally, not always, but it's generally because they care about it. You know, the worst thing in the world as a product, any product that you release, is for people to go, and then not get interested in it. So if people are critical about your product, or people are providing feedback about your product, it's generally because they want the product to succeed. They want it to be a good product, you know. I've never sent an email to a car manufacturer about a car design that I've passed that I didn't like and I had no intention of buying, but I have gone to the dealer and said, this is ridiculous, you've got to fix this, otherwise it's a great car.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's been a few people saying like, sorry for bringing this up. It's like, no, on the contrary, like, do bring it up, because otherwise we can't find out.
Yes, exactly. Kanozy737 says it's just so great that unlike other developers, you're still working on it. You haven't released it and said, there you go guys, it's done.
I'm glad people feel that way, I guess. I'm not, yeah. I definitely plan on, at least on the UNS side, I plan on keeps work. I can't speak anymore apparently. I plan on keeping working on it for a while. So.
Yes, no, of course. I think that's the best thing, because as aircraft get more and more complicated, you want to get to the point where you've learned the aircraft. You want that aircraft to continue to be evolving and being supported after you've spent the time learning it. There's no point in developing, you know, when a sim aircraft was a case of control lead, start the engines, go flying, then yeah, another one every week is no problem at all. But when you invest the time to learn an aircraft, you want that aircraft to have the depth behind it to continue to make that worthwhile. And the flip side to that is it does need a developer to support it for longer than perhaps would have been the case 15 years or so ago. Now, the flip side to that is you're more likely to see, and this is not the Q400 or any aircraft that I'm looking at the moment, but there is a likelihood that developers will move more towards expansion packs as a method of providing further income on a product that you've already bought. Now you can see that either as a bad thing because they're getting more money from you, or you can see it as a good thing in that they're continuing to support the product that you love and that they've developed over such a long period of time. That varies between developer and developer. You know, some developers put out little expansion packs that are rather marginal from a value perspective. But imagine 3 or 4 years down the line, if there was an expansion pack for the TBM 900 that improves the navigation system or does something else. Not that that's something that is being planned, but that's an aircraft that I would be happy to spend the money on again, because it's an aircraft that I've learned and that I love flying. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. What else have we got? Toto says, interesting seeing texture resampling when I was running around the cabin. The Q400 is rather marginal VRAM usage-wise on my 6GB CPU. Yes, it is. I've also turned my texture density up a little bit, but I understand that shouldn't be a thing, shouldn't be a problem on Vulkan. So that brings us on to performance, because people are usually want to know about the performance. And it is a fairly heavy add-on for Sassel. So I'm running on a AMD Ryzen 5800X. So the CPU is fine. The system is running on NVMe RAM, and I've got 64GB of RAM and 2TB NVMe. So the core system performance is fine. I'm also running on an old 1060 6GB. So I don't have a lot of GPU headroom on this aircraft. I don't have a lot of GPU headroom across the board on X-Plane. But any CPU tasks, my system can more than adequately handle. This aircraft, I don't know if it's simply because it's Sassel or whether or not it's the way it's coded, but it is fairly heavy. You can see Amy's UNS is running separately here at around about 117 microseconds there. So it's a little bit heavier than some of the add-ons. I don't have anything really to compare it with. It's a bit heavier than the Fearless 747-200. It's a little bit heavier, maybe around the same ballpark as the AnyBuild's A300. It's a lot heavier than things like the TBM.
Yeah, so if you can actually see one of the reasons for that if you go in, I believe it's in View or Developer, in the menus, where you can show the instrument click regions. It'll be in View, so if you can view, main menu, View.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Ah, goodness, okay.
And you can see all of the instruments, basically the click spot, like the manipulators are the exact same geometry as the actual buttons. So
okay.
Very, very high poly, which means that's why you get such a high CPU load on the X-Plane portion of that pie chart as well.
Okay.
Because it essentially spends a lot of time like checking whether your mouse is over a manipulator or not.
I gotcha. Okay.
So Jack is working on this to essentially use like simplified geometry for the manipulators.
That's going to take a little bit of time to get through though, because I guess there's a lot of them to sort
There's
out.
quite a lot of them, but I think he's starting work on that next week, so hopefully that'll come at some point, and that also means that we can make some of the boxes bigger as well, because some of the switches I find myself hard to aim for sometimes when they're just tiny, small, little flick switches. So
Yes.
it'll be nice to have that's like a big box around it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Quite a few requests I've seen for having pop-ups. So the main displays here do not pop up. You can pop up the UNS into its dedicated window, but you can't pop up the displays at the moment. I would echo that it would be really nice to be able to pop this up, especially if you're running on a fairly limited screen like I am. It would be nice to be able to have the PFD popped out and relatively larger, kind of for the landing approach. It's really, let me zoom in, for the landing it's really this segment of the PFD that you need to see. So if I could have that presented kind of here, that would be perfect. So pop-ups would be nice to have.
Yep, so that's something I have on my roadmap as well, because because some of the part of the displays are rendered in Sassel and the others in C. It requires a little bit of coordination between Jack and I, but that should be doable. So.
Sure. Again, this is all kind of refinements we're talking about now. For a day one, I don't buy many aircraft on launch day. I missed launch day by about 5 minutes, but that's because I was driving and I was still in launch day Canadian time, so it's probably fine. I bought this on release day because I really, really wanted a Q400 in the sim, and I'm not disappointed in it. I have this, for those of you that don't know, I work as a commercial pilot now, but my previous career was in software. I worked for a software development company, and I was the technical director of the software company. Part of that involves having technical oversight of the technical support delivery and customer service and software testing and software development. So although I wasn't a developer, the developers kind of fell under my remit of teams to look after, as did the testers. And if I find something that is not quite right, that appears not quite right, my instinct is to mess with it and to see what happens. Another example of that is the electrical control here. So it's a DC aircraft. I'll switch DC Gen 2 off, and I get a ping from DC Gen 2, but that's all fine. It should all be behaving itself. If we look in here at systems, you see that I've got the caution reset. That's fine. So the DC buses are all powered. The transformer rectifiers, you've basically got 4 systems feeding into the DC as well as the 3 batteries. So everything should be fully powered now. The TRUs, well, it's sharing load across the aircraft. That's fine. If DC1 were to fail, then my understanding is the TRUs and the batteries should take over from that. It doesn't do that at the moment. If I switch DC Gen 1 off, everything will die. I'm not going to do that. What I will do is I'll switch DC Gen 2 back on again. Before I do that, just have a look that we're in LNAV, AP and ALT. DC Gen 2 comes on. Autopilot disconnects. But now I can re-engage it. So for some reason turning that generator on causes the thing to disconnect. You're not going to notice that. You're flying the aircraft normally, that's not going to be a factor. But I guess it's, as I said, down to my previous experience in dealing with software, that when I had a little question mark over the electrical system, I think, I was looking at the TRU loads and the AC loads here. That really prompted me to start pushing buttons and get into parts of the system that you probably won't see if you're flying it. Toto thinks it'll be a day or two to sort out the manipulators and repeated keys. Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that.
I have no clue how that actually. Well, that's a lie. I have a slight clue as to how it works, but I have very little insight on how Jack's pipeline is set up. So I literally could not say either way. But yeah, hopefully it shouldn't be a too big
an issue to sort out. Oh, that's fair enough. And
Eh,
I mean, to be honest, the most important thing is that a developer doesn't abandon the product when they've got some money from it. You know, everything else is forgivable. I don't think... I think most people who've been around simulations long enough realise that the majority of developers are small, dedicated teams that are trying their very best to give you the best experience. And testing is largely the developers themselves, the developers, their friends, and then maybe some volunteers from the community. It's not a professional software development organisation like you may imagine. I don't even know. I mean, PMDG were perhaps one of the biggest, or were one of the biggest sim developers. I don't even know how extensive their testing is. But certainly amongst the X-Plane developers, I can't think of any that are big enough to have professional testers across the board. So we need to be realistic about when a product comes out. For the first couple of weeks, it may have issues with it. It almost certainly will have issues with it. And what matters is how the developer responds to it. And I don't even want the developer to rush out a load of fixes the day after launch. I'd rather they, you know, if there's nothing breaking in it, they gather their information, they have a think about how to fix it best, and they push out an update within a couple of weeks to improve the situation. And that's probably the best we can expect. You know, looking for a flawless release is probably, you're never going to be happy if that's what you're expecting. The Q400 is very solid for launch week. We should probably have a look at the arrival, because I'm conscious, what have we got, Resme out there. All of France looks like all of X-Plane. I haven't got Auto for France, unfortunately. Is that an airport? That looks like an airport. This is now guess the airport from... Oh, let's just do it this way. We must be...
I'm gonna guess Dijon. Yeah, I think it was completely off.
Lucis.
Yep, absolutely. Oh yeah, okay, that's actually probably the biggest GA thing around Paris.
Oh yes.
Lots of
Oh, there's the
jets
other
as
one,
well,
yeah.
I believe.
Yeah. Where's...
If that's
You know what?
okay,
There's a display here. We could look at this.
if that's okay, before we do arrival setup, I'm
Yes.
going to go make myself a cup of tea because I'm getting like a pretty dry throat.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. That's all right. I'll
Right
leave the
back.
audio open and come back whenever you're ready. People in chat, it's great to have Amy with us this evening. I think it comes across how much work Amy's put into this, and our desire to get the UNS spot on for you all as well. Toto is teeing as well at the same time, and the northern half of France is rather dull. I would agree with that. It's nice and flat, Winston. It's high-speed auto routes if you're on the ground, and no terrain to run into if you're flying. What I'll do is I'll get the charts ready so that when Amy comes back we are good to go for loading it up. So Geneva, we are looking for the arrival, which will be the Lussar arrival. We're looking for an ILS approach, ILS 04. We'll do 04 because it's a little bit more scenic for the terrain, although you're not over the lake. And on the ground, airport chart. Somebody has flattened Geneva. I'm using the scenery gateway Geneva, and somebody's flattened it, which is quite annoying because it's an interesting runway, Geneva. It's kind of like a little bowl. But flattening it means that the runway ends are at the wrong elevation, which can get interesting for some things. Cool, we're all there. Johnny Kazmatis says the aircraft, exceptional aircraft with fantastic sounds, well done to the developers. Yeah, it does sound good. It's a very pleasant aircraft to fly. As I said, it's the sort of thing you can pick up and learn enough to get going with in a few minutes, and then spend a few days trying to get it all as per the SOPs. And of course, you know, just start up and fly if that's your thing. Old man and his fancy water, you know, Captain Crash. Dangerous strategy. Terrain landscaping tool, that would be an interesting thing to have in X-Plane. So I really hope the new textures on X-Plane 12 are a little bit better. The way it kind of just throws the airports. I mean, I know why it does it, but I'm kind of hoping for something a little bit better. It's that Orly there. That looks like Orly. Yeah, that's Orly. Ah, there we go. So that would be, I think that's Le Bourget, and that will be de Gaulle. Just see if we can zoom in. That's Orly. That feels like Le Bourget, so by a process of elimination, that there, that blank space is where Charles de Gaulle is.
Charles de Gaulle, land of the 30-minute taxi.
Yeah, exactly.
It's I'm always frustrated when I fly there and you land and you can see the gate that you're going to.
And then you taxi
you're going
round.
to have to go the whole way around.
Yes, no, exactly that. Takes a while.
I can't imagine as a pilot the frustration that it must be when you land and you know you still have like 30 minutes on your schedule, because
They've got fancy lights on the ground now at de Gaulle as well. I don't know how long they've been there. They're fancy taxi lighting system.
Follow the green system.
No, it's a runway incursion prevention system that it will have red stop bars when there's an aircraft on approach to the runway, when there's an aircraft on the runway or just getting airborne.
Right.
And then basically it's a secondary backup for air traffic. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right, so not quite as fancy as, I believe it's Singapore that has they essentially tell you, oh, I don't know, Jersey 1 to 3, follow the greens, and they'll have a system that lights up the green lights ahead of you.
Yes.
Where you're cleared to go, and
I think Heathrow's got that as well. But yeah, it does sound like it'd be a lot easier. You know, there's nothing worse than getting home at the end of a 12-hour day and then getting 15 million taxi instructions. Like, I just want to park. Just tell me the stand and let me find my own way there, and I'll be happy.
Yeah, well, and I can't speak for real world, but in simulator as well, because the charts that we have access to are jet charts. The taxi charts on there are pretty abysmal.
Yes. Yeah.
Where you get that weird splits between the general taxi chart and the gates chart, I believe.
It's silly, isn't it? You kind of want, I mean, this is the thing even with iPads for your charts, that the charts displayed on your iPad are still paper charts. You know, it's a PDF. Whereas what I really want, this is my taxi chart here, or my airfield chart, I want to be able to zoom in and see more detail. I don't want to have to go over to this one and then sort it out. And there's no reason why this chart can't be, 15,000 pixels wide and just let me zoom out and, be a vector chart as opposed to just this raster thing.
Well, on like the real jet charts, I hope at least are actual PDFs. I think Navigraphs are images just to avoid people like ripping them out and then flying with them. But
yeah,
I hope at least that what you'll have like on an actual EFB would be.
Hopefully something a bit better, but at the moment it's really just a clone of the paper chart, even to the extent that sometimes the paper charts that I've got, or the iPad charts that I've got, will have been previously presented as two little charts on a landscape sheet. So imagine the other half of the chart would have been here, and what you get presented on your iPad is a white blank space with the chart rotated through 90 degrees. So you get this sort of thing with a white thing on the top. It's like, well, that's crazy. Why is that still a thing? Yeah.
It's not ideal.
It is not. Anyway, let's load this up for the arrival, and then we can have another look at the chat here. So we've got plenty of gas now. We're going to arrive overhead Geneva with 1.8 tons, which is overkill a little bit. What I want to do is to verify that we've got the correct altitude constraints on the FMS, and we've got a vectors leg here, so I'm probably going to change that from a vectors leg just to allow it to follow the arrival. You can see that we go to Sovad, Kerad, GG 503, then down towards Indus. If air traffic allows, we'll go to Indus, and then the approach chart really starts at Indus. So the simple thing for me is to link GGS 503 to Indus, and then on towards Belka. But let's check through and see what we've got. So if I look on the flight plan screen here, and just to explain the technical bits behind it, Amy's watching the stream live on Twitch. I was trying to stream it back to her on audio chat or video chat so that she has lower latency, but what she sees is what you see with the same delay. because there were bandwidth issues, as you may remember. So I'll try and do this a little bit slower in the hope that we can all stay in sync.
So for what it's worth, I think I've got only 2 or 3 seconds of delay, so we shouldn't be too bad.
Hopefully, I'll try and do things slowly. That's my normal state now, as is mentioned in the chat already. Pretty old. But we'll scroll through here. There's the flight plan page, and we'll go through. We're currently approaching Pilil, which is here, then Pimop, Ixis, Pibat, and Lusar, Sauni. So, at the moment it's missing the above flight level 200 at Lusar. We've got the 160 at Sauni and the 8000 at Lurko. Amy, is it possible for us to reinsert this constraint manually? The Lusar
so
constraint?
you won't be able to insert a above restriction, unlike an Airbus or a Boeing. You can put it at restriction.
Okay.
However, I'm actually looking at it, and I'm surprised it hasn't computed crossing altitudes for Sauni and Lurko, actually.
So if I scroll down a little bit, I think it's because it doesn't have a complete route on there. So
that might be why. Yes.
So what we've got is we've got Lurko, and then we've got Dinig, we've got Sovad, which is, it's got a crossing altitude computed for Sovad, and then down towards Kerad and GGS 503. So what I'm going to do, see we've got this vectors leg on here, and then...
So yeah.
Yeah.
So I know actually what happens. The UNS is fairly stupid, as we've mentioned a few times now. And the vectors leg, it assumes that it's going to be a 20-mile leg.
Okay.
So the vectors point is constantly 20 miles away from its stars, or if you're flying it 20 miles away from you. So what it assumes is when you're going to reach Gulf 503, you're then going to keep going the same direction for 20 miles and then essentially go back the way 20 miles to go back to Indus.
I see.
So that's why it's calculated an extremely high altitude that's so bad, right?
So there's two ways I could fix that then, I'm guessing. What I would do on the Airbus is I'd put an appropriate constraint in for the 503. I could say, let's say 7,500 feet, and code that in there.
Yep, you can
and that would drive it down. But what I'm going to do in this case is I'm simply going to delete the vectors leg, because after vectors, the next thing we've got is Indus. Okay? So if I click on 37 here, then delete vectors.
So hang on, because I've got an even nicer solution for
Okay,
you.
let's do it.
So if you go to the next page,
yes,
so we can see everything. Now click on vectors.
Yes.
And so you know how in a Boeing you can kind of like squash the flight plan by bringing a leg up like a few spaces.
Yes.
And it'll delete the intervening legs. So you can do kind of similar thing here, where you type in here the number of the. So you want Indus here to replace vectors, right? And everything between the point that you're at and Indus to be squashed. So if you put in 39 and enter.
Oh, look at that. I like it. GG 503. It's got Indus. It's got a better constraint crossing Sovad. And Indus, Belka, ILS, and then Belka. So we've talked about this before, Amy. We've got Belka in there twice as well. If I show the chart, we can see that there's a Indus, Belka, and Belka is where the transition ends, if you like. And then we've got the start of the approach and Belka again. So that won't cause it any issues. But if we wanted it to be tidy, we could remove, but we must remove the one before. Don't touch anything after.
Yes. So the rules are never change anything after the approach label, basically, because if you do this, it will void the procedure inside the FMS. So the legs will still be here and you'll fly them, but it won't consider it an approach.
Excellent.
I mean, it's the same rules where in a Airbus, I'm guessing, where you're not
yes,
really
you don't touch it.
Yeah, you're not meant to go and mess with the points for the approach.
But so I can delete this one because it's before the approach tag.
Yeah, it won't matter too much. Actually, I'm pretty sure it won't change anything about the guidance, but yeah.
And if you want to make it a little bit easier to see the constraints as well, you can go menu and compressed, and then it gives you more waypoints on the screen that you can scroll through, and you can see all the constraints. Now, the reason why that may be useful is if I now calculate VNAV, if I tell it that I want to descend at 1800 feet per minute, I open the window here, I put in 1800 feet per minute, and it's going to calculate, it should calculate a descent path. What have I not done?
No, so it's not you. That is 1.04, which fixed some of the bugs, but
Okay,
clearly did not fix that one. So
okay, no problem.
yeah, I got a few reports just before the stream started and didn't have time to push any updates.
Okay,
so.
no problem at all. So if you're using a later version after this stream's out, you put your target vertical speed in here, and it'll calculate the descent. Does it still give us VTO calculations, Amy?
Yes, it should. Yeah.
Okay. So what I was going to say is if you put a target vertical speed in here, it will then populate all of the altitudes in the descent. And these,
actually,
yeah.
I might have. Can you have a look at Sony, or whatever it was called? So it'll be on the page before that, I think.
Yes.
Yes. So if you right, so I think the problem is because the VNAV path is calculated goes above us at Sony. So what you
Okay.
can do is if you highlight it and instead put a 25,000.
Okay.
Yep, and then enter.
Yep.
And then if you go into VNAV, you should be able to do a direct. Well, so in that case, no, because Sony is at the level that you're already at.
Okay.
Well, you could do it that way, but what pilots do in this case is they'll put in their actual level on the waypoint, and they'll do a vertical to it, and so they'll essentially create a vertical segment from your current position to the waypoint, which is going to be level, right?
Okay, so vertical to Sony,
And
like
then
this?
descent. Yep.
So just enter here?
Yep.
I gotcha.
And yeah, so it's not having a good day because of the bug that I introduced. So the VDEV
Sure.
is absolutely wrong.
No worries. Well,
Which, yeah.
let's not go up, let's go down. Oh, it's going the wrong way.
Yeah, it's not happy, is it?
Let's not mess with that just now. So we'll see what happens. We can also do vertical 2, I'm guessing. We just keep an eye on the vertical 2 as we go down. So this was I updated to this version of the aircraft about half an hour before the stream started. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but as Amy said, she's working on it. And anybody that's done any software development or messed around with simulators at all will know that vertical nav is one of the hardest things to get right in a model. We'll not worry about that too much. As long as I can have a rough estimate on when we're going to start. So it should be basically crossing Sony at 2.5, and then that looks fairly reasonable going down there. Yeah, that should work out. So we'll keep an eye on it as we go. We need to set up the radio aids as well, I believe. So one of the things it's got, Amy, is this FMS option here where it says FMS tune on the radio panel here. Is that functional at the moment? Does that do anything?
No, so you can actually go, if you click on the tune page on the FMS, you'll see it will show what the real one shows.
Okay, remote tune not configured.
Yep.
Excellent. So this doesn't make any difference if it's on both or FMS tune?
At the moment, no.
Okay.
Once that's implemented when you're in FMS tune, you'll actually be able to tune frequencies from the FMS.
I gotcha.
I had a basic version in, but I wanted to wait because I want to add. So in the real one, you can either just type in your frequency, but you can also use the list page that we've seen earlier.
Yes.
To actually list nearby radio aids.
Okay.
And actually tune these through that, which is pretty handy.
Yes, that'd be nice to see.
But I wanted to make sure that I could add the full mode rather than like a half-baked version.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Oh. So what we need to do then is we need to set up the ILS and the inbound course. So what we've got is ILS, the runway 04, and the frequency is 110.9, and the idents is India, November, Echo. So 110.9, I'm going to choose this selector here. I'm going to tune it to 110.9, and we push the button to change over. We should be able to listen to it as well, which is down here. I may have my volume turned down. No, that's fair. But there's nothing there as yet, obviously. But it's got lib radio reception, I believe, so you've got the benefits of the radio in there. I'll put it on the second ILS as well, so 110.9 on both of the receivers. It doesn't have a standalone ILS receiver, so you use the nav radios for that on the Dash 8. The inbound course is 044. Now, if you're familiar with the G1000, you know that it can do some fancy stuff that if certain conditions are met, it will sequence over to nav mode automatically. So GNS, G1000 can do a nav to nav intercept. This aircraft can't do that, and also it will not set the course yourself. So you may be thinking at this moment, what I'm going to do is do it old school. I'll put it into heading mode, I'll change my nav source to ILS, and I'll start setting courses. The easier way to do it on this installation is to click on Hold Format, and it brings up the ILS receiver on the multifunction display. I can then happily set my course to 044 and then go back to normal display. And I can do the same. I need to push and hold it for a long time. There we go. I can do the same on the other side. Push and hold. And there's ILS. Set it to 044. And then push and hold to go back to the map. Is there any way, Amy, that we can scroll through the waypoints as well? Could I zoom in or have a look at the approach itself to check the coding before we get there?
So yes, however, I'm not sure the real one has the ability. So
Okay.
I'm still trying to get feedback from that, because the few pilots that I've asked, usually when I've asked, oh, like when you're in north up mode, can you scroll through your flight plan? The response that I got from pretty much everyone was like, oh, north up plans, we never use it.
Right,
So,
okay.
But yeah, so if you go in the flight plan page on the FMS and then scroll through the pages, once you get past your two waypoints, it'll pick up the MFD essentially. And
I gotcha. Okay, excellent. So it's looking at this waypoint here?
yes.
Okay. Yes, I can see how that might be difficult because it's incrementing based on a page and not based on a waypoint. Okay, interesting. Pilsner asks, are these buttons animated? Let's have a look. I don't think so. I think
So
that
I think the format one is the only one that isn't, because we had to do the... Ah, no, okay, you're right. Yes, I believe the change happened because... oh my days, words. Because we needed to support long click, and the system that Jack has to animate all the buttons didn't support that, so for now it's reverted back to using like the basic stuff that doesn't animate. But
I see. Okay, but the UNS buttons animate quite happily there.
Actually, a bit more than they do in real life. In real life, that is awful, very clicky buttons.
Yes.
Trying to think of like something that would have the same kind of buttons. Actually, saw something like that.
So
Yeah,
on a real Airbus FMS, there's not much movement in the buttons. You know, they are almost like membrane keyboard buttons. They move a very small amount, but not enough that you actually visually see them move. The INS in the Fearless 747-200, those buttons really do move. They're proper 1960s, 1970s push-in buttons.
Yeah. So on the UNS, it's not even membrane. It's just little, like when they do like a very dry click noise when you click. I'm trying to think of the best example of that in everyday life that you'd have. But yeah.
Yes. I'm trying to think. I've got a washer dryer machine that's got non-touch buttons on it. They're just like you just push them and they don't really move. They're just
Oh,
there.
that's helpful.
Toto says a Nokia 3310. That sounds about right.
Actually, probably yes.
Yeah.
My goal is still to try and find an old UNS CD on eBay today. So
Yes, that would be good.
once I manage, it shall be brought back.
Do you know if they've got any intention, Amy, of putting pilot figures in the external view?
I remember hearing Jack mention it a while back. So my answer is I think think so.
You think so? Excellent. I'm glad the airplane's here now. I would have been disappointed had I not found out about that airplane. Excellent. Well, we're nearly there. We have got, let's have a look in here. If I look at the nav page, it tells me about the current waypoints, but if I click perf, it gives me distance and time en route to Geneva, so 145 miles and 24 minutes. It'll take us a little bit longer than that, but not too much longer. Everything we've got is basically set up for the approach. We've got the VNAV indication here that we know it may or it may not give us sensible guidance. It looks like it may actually do a reasonable job after Saudi. We've got altitudes all the way down.
I think once we reach Saudi, actually, we might be able. Actually,
I'm counting on Amy. I don't want to have to manage a descent manually. Goodness. Never mind this 3 times table stuff.
Okay, so there's something that might work. If you go to flight plan.
Yes. Flight plan.
And delete the altitude at Saudi.
This one here.
Yes. So if you just go backspace on the keyboard once you're on it, until it's all dashes. There you go. Enter. There we go. VNAV, and then cancel VNAV.
Oh yes.
Because right now it thinks we need to climb. Open the field again. There we go. That might fix it. Well, look at this. That's top of descent.
Excellent.
It looks like.
So this is calculating, if I wanted to go down to this constraint now, I'd need to do half a degree, which is 326 feet per minute. But this has been calculated at 2.87, which is based on that number I put in there. So if I want to get closer to 3 degrees, just because. I find this is a particularly unusual way to do it. But if I step back though, as a pilot, at 25, 35, 40,000 feet, I don't really have much concept of what degrees are, but I know the maximum vertical speed that I'd want to achieve in the early descent. So being able to specify that, I can maybe understand where they're coming from if I step back a little bit from the sim. Yeah, it seems fairly good. The good news is I can tell we're getting close to Geneva because the world of X-plane textures ends and the world of ortho begins. Nice.
I really need to get myself some ortho for the Alps because, yeah.
It's nice. Toto finds the angles much easier to reason about. Yeah, it's at higher altitudes I find the angles hard, Toto, because when you've got a high, down at 20,000 feet, doing 300 knots, 400 knots ground speed, 2,000 feet a minute, I totally get that. When you're up there at 37, 38 and you're doing 500 plus ground speed, asking an aircraft that is sitting 5 or 10 knots below VNE, or MMO, sorry, to go into a 2,500 foot per minute descent is a bit of an ask. So I can understand that this is sacrificing a little bit of simplicity for giving you a pilot-friendly value. But yeah, I don't know. I've never flown an aircraft that has either of those methods of working, so let's see how it goes. Yeah, Winston, that's one of the ways I used to do it as well. It's just basically work out how many miles per minute you're going. You can do it that way when you've got a very high altitude cruise, because your task changes as you descend. The timing that you start off with if the GPS or the calculator that you're using doesn't predict that reduction in rate of descent, your descent takes longer than it expects, or your time to cover the distance takes longer than it starts off with. So you end up getting lower earlier, and then you have to shallow it off, which is kind of what you do anyway. But if you do it based on half ground speed for your vertical speed, so at the moment we'd be doing 1,800 feet per minute, which is roughly what we've got, then you get a constant profile descent. 2 nautical miles per minute in the Cessna 172. That's about right. The challenge is always happy at -3 degrees and ignore tasks. Yeah, so that's it. Unpressurized, 500 feet a minute descent. Just calculate it that way and you're good to go. Carol Head, thanks very much for following the channel. Hope you're enjoying what you see so far. Because we're getting lighter as we fly along here, my margin to the red line is getting a bit tight. So I'm just going to back the power off a little bit. Just nudge the power levers out of the detent. And you see when it comes out of the detent, the pop-up occurs. I'll just nudge it back a little bit. Let's try 62 and see how that works. Again, it would be great to have that pop-up come up whenever, either when the lever's moved or when the lever is restricted by something in the sim. If you want to see it momentarily, just whatever you've got bound as your gate. So I just use toggle reversers. If you just nudge toggle reversers, it'll bring that pop-up up every single time. Sweet. I haven't aligned my heading just yet. We're going to do a flaps 35 landing just for giggles. And you know what I haven't done? I haven't set the minima where I can't see aircraft. So 1620, let's go for MDA. Oop. Stop zooming, damn it.
If only there was a plugin with that exact name.
That'd be useful, wouldn't it? 1620, and I guess I'll do the same over this side. There's some mode, Amy, where it does like a dual flight director mode on the approach. Do you know if that's, do you know anything about that, or if it's implemented?
So we like the flight directors have the capability of doing this. I don't know if that's actually displayed.
I see.
But yes, so forget the exact rules for activation, but you need to have both radios on the same ILS, same course, so classic. I believe the radar altimeter needs to be 100,000 feet.
Okay.
And I don't know, there's a few conditions like this, but in which case, because normally, so you've got two flight guidance modules, which are essentially the flight directors. Normally, they'll both be bound to whatever side the HSI select arrow is pointing to.
Okay.
Right? And they'll both, well, in flight guidance module 1 will feed both flight directors.
Okay. You can see here it says left-hand HSI on the number 2 side.
Yeah. And so when you reach essentially when you reach the conditions for dual flight director, then flight guidance module 2 will look at the right-hand side, so the nav2 radio and everything. Flight director 1 will look at left-hand side radios, and you'll have the dual FD mode, which will cancel essentially if you get like a comparator error.
Okay. That makes sense. And it's only, is it a single autopilot it's got fitted? You can see both sides are lit up there. Single autopilot system rather than a dual autopilot.
Yeah, it doesn't have, it has a single autopilot, which incidentally is why it's only certified for Cat 2, I believe, in coupled approaches.
That makes sense. I'm just clicking on the speed tape here. I've got 2 bugs. So this is my, what have we got? This is VAP at 132 and VREF at 117. Or basically this is like an increment on it. So I can't remember. There's not much documentation given with the product on how you'd carry out the approach. But what I've been doing is I've been using 190 knots as my minimum clean speed. So without flaps, I'll slow down to 190 knots. Then to slow down below 190 knots, I take flap 5. That gives me a 10 knot margin on the flap limiting speed. Flaps 5, I'll slow down to 170 knots. And from 170 knots, to finish the deceleration, we put the gear down, then take flaps 10. That takes me down to 160, and then flaps full, and we can go down to VREF at that point. I'm not 100% sure what the correct speeds are, because all of the dash training material I've seen isn't really very picky about that sort of thing.
Yeah, what I've seen, what I've heard, but that's also from US pilots mostly, where for some reason they tend to slow down a lot earlier on approaches. They don't do what most European approaches seem to do, which is stay fast until like 560 ME.
Yes.
But what they seem to be doing is at 180 knots go gear down flaps 5 and then flaps. So they often won't stop at flaps 10, so they'll go directly flaps 15 around 160 knots.
Okay.
And then the rule is normally flaps 35 at 145, I think, but that causes a massive balloon.
Yes.
And so I believe there's some criteria that allows them to essentially like bypass this and delay it until 135 instead.
Okay. I need to look it up then. It'd be nice
Yeah.
to have a little bit more documentation on how you do the decelerated approach and the stabilized approach.
Yeah.
We are 1 minute from top descent, so normally what I do is put the air traffic cleared altitude in here, but I know that I'm going to go down to the final approach altitude of 6,000 feet, so we'll let the aircraft worry about the descent profile. So I'm going to cheat and use VNAV basically, wind it down, set Alt Cell, and then if I click VNAV, we've got Alt Cell and VNAV, so it should pick up the descent as we get.
Fingers crossed.
Oh yes, and if it doesn't, you know what, it's got a lot of drag available, so we'll just descend manually.
So another fun one from our American pilots. Apparently, in some airlines at least, what they do once they've confirmed on the FMS that they're satisfied with the VNAV profile is, instead of doing what I would have assumed you do, which is what you said, where you you dial in the next altitude restriction, right? Instead they dial in the field elevation.
Oh, right.
And
Okay, that is interesting. That may not be the done thing here.
A full Hail Mary move.
Yes. Keep your fingers crossed. So I'm just nudging the power back. It's just about to start the descent. You can see the descent arrow coming down, or the VDEV coming down. And Amy, you've smoothed this out, I think, on this version.
A little bit, but I'm still not 100% satisfied with how it does it.
You know what? We've got VNAV path. That's fine, and around about 30% is a reasonable aiming point to begin with. Just looking at that speed trend, if it keeps increasing, you know, just make the power adjustment until that speed trend stays where it is. One of the things that's caught me out before is keep an eye on the red line here. As we descend, that red line's going to increase, but when you get down to flight level 100, I think it is, or maybe 80, it reduces again. So you can be quite happily flying a high-speed descent, and then you get caught out by the red bar coming down to meet you. Just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you've got two restrictions. You've got 255, I think, at 10,000, and then when you pass 8,000, it will reduce to 240 or 245 for windshield bird strike certification stuff, I believe.
Oh, makes sense.
So, yeah, it's like I've many times gotten the
yes, the clacker, the beep.
It's a very annoying beep as well.
Yes. There you go. There's. I guess we're still just approaching Geneva now. Geneva's down here. So there's the airport. It's a fairly straightforward airport. It's got a long approach on the ILS on both ends, but coming in from the north and from the south, it's terrain bound. So if you're coming in on runway 22, you've got this ridge of terrain. Forget the name of it now. You've got this ridge of terrain to descend over. It's less of a factor on 22. It's fairly obvious on runway 04.
It's quite a beautiful approach to fly in real life. I've done it as a passenger pilot, but yeah, I've done it a few times, and it's
very scenic, huh?
quite pretty.
So there we go. There's one of the turns, and it increased the vertical speed ever so slightly, but it's recovered again. So I found that because the UNS doesn't do turn prediction, but on a tight turn like this 90 degrees here, when it sequences the waypoint, it can get its turn prediction or its VNAV prediction a little bit confused, and it sounds like that's a real thing as well. So at any point, if the aircraft isn't doing what you want, Just stick it into vertical speed mode and fix it. It really should be as simple as that.
In other fun things that the VNAV doesn't do, it doesn't take into account, because obviously it only knows about your pressure corrected altitudes that you get from the editor computer, but so it doesn't know about the difference between pressure altitude and well, it can't know anyway what your QNH is at arrival.
Okay.
So when you change your baro setting to the QNH when you pass a transition level, it doesn't do any compensation for that, so your path will jump.
Right.
And I was curious about this because I thought, well, that's a bit annoying. And so I asked pilots, I was like, is that accurate? Or like, so not only is it accurate, but pretty much any dash pilot will know that when you get your first altitude instead of a level, you wind the baro back slowly. So if you know
so it doesn't zoom. That makes sense. Yeah, you don't want to confuse the poor thing.
Just like hectopascal per hectopascal, just...
That's it. We were talking about pressurization earlier. You can see that I'm now descending down below 20,000 feet. It isn't changing the pressurization altitude, so this is a little bug the aircraft's got. It's fine, it'll get down to 8,000 feet and it'll just be pressurized with negative pressure. But with the landing field elevation set, your cabin should be descending, roughly on schedule to keep, to descend the cabin so that you get a gentle descent down to landing elevation. I'm going to put the fasten seatbelt signs on just now. I should have really checked the cabin temperature. My goodness. Duct's a bit cold. You know what, I've probably not turned that up. The cabin's warm enough, but the duct is cold. Oh, there goes the duct. Let's not worry about that. Cool, so fasten seatbelts are on. I'm going to put the landing lights on as well, so it's one less thing to forget about. And everything else should be set appropriately up there. So there we go. You see how we're down in the 17,000 feet. The red Barbara's pole has disappeared. Thanks, Pilsner. Thanks for the mod work there. Can always count on Pilsner to get rid of the spammers. Inertial separators for landing. Do we have inertial separators?
Yes, so if you look at the buttons under engine intake,
this one here?
protection, so they're closed right now. I'm not sure what the rule is, if you have to turn them on.
Oh, here we go. Sorry, 1 second. We're doing the high rate of descent now. So I'll go into vertical speed mode and I'll just set that back to where it was, about 1800, and it should come good as we do the turn. So just something to watch out for on those steep turns there. The tight turns, its vertical profile can get a little bit confused. But no big deal. Stick it back into VNAV and it goes back into VPAth and everything's okay. I mentioned it very briefly as well. It doesn't do nav to nav transfer, so at some point I'm going to have to put it into heading mode to change over from FMS needles to the ILS needles. What I should be doing as a proper pilot is keeping my heading bug aligned. What I'm actually going to do is to cheat, and I'm going to set it to 070 or 075. So my ILS approach is on 044. That gives me just about a 30-degree intercept already programmed up and ready to go. So just a little cheat there. We can see it as we turn. Hopefully it'll make sense when we do it. Is everybody enjoying the dash so far? It's been a longer stream than I had in mind due to the little technical issues. Or maybe the stream's the same length, but it's taken longer actually being involved in it. Thanks for sticking with me if you've been here from the beginning. And especially thanks to Amy for joining, because it makes it a lot more entertaining when you've got somebody to talk to.
It's been fun so far, so happy to join.
Awesome stuff. Here's not colour matched very well on the ortho, but otherwise, look at beautiful Geneva.
It does make it look really good. I was thinking, like, especially when you had the forward view in the cockpit.
Yes.
With that terrain, that really, yeah. It's a nice look.
I think my ski charter customers are going to be quite unhappy with the snow conditions. It's not really great. Well, maybe. Is that one Mont Blanc? Is that Mont Blanc? I can't remember.
I forget. I was going to say look at the ND, but that ND doesn't show intersection because there's one called
Moblo, right? That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you might be able to get away if you go in the FMS.
Yes.
And flight plan page, go at the very end after you missed approach. There we go. And if you click the line under and just put Mobler in here. And if you zoom out, you might be able to see. Is it not drawing it? Go into North Hub mode, maybe.
Hang on, I may need to concentrate on flying it in a second.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Schomberry. Nah, well maybe it's too far away still.
Maybe.
Maybe. One to look for later. Now I'm in North Up mode. Let's fix that. There we go. So I'm going to start slowing down. The speed limit is 220 knots. I'll just bring the power back. And we know that previously it gets a little bit exciting in the turns. So all I'm going to do is click it into vertical speed now. And we'll just keep an eye on that VDEV as we make the turn. Can you run the pressurization on the APU, Toto? I don't think so.
You can't. The Q400 APU is not certified to operate in flights at all.
There we go. So I can change my FO over to ILS nav source just now because it's flying on the left hand side. I could also display it on this screen if I really wanted, but having the map is more useful for me just now. So one of the really useful things for the dash, here we go, you see the VDEV drops off the bottom, but simply selecting vertical speed keeps us all sorted out here. And if you look at VNAV, you see the numbers are changing fairly rapidly. So it's not high, it just thinks it's high momentarily because it's not predicting that turn all the way around. One of the great things about the dash is being able to keep high speed on for a lot of the approach because you can slow down really well. So I wouldn't think about ever intercepting a glide slope at 210 knots in an Airbus. But I'd be quite happy doing it in the dash because it kind of works. We are going to end up intercepting the glide slope from above, potentially. That's fairly common if you turn in this tightly at Geneva. What I'm looking for now is for it to flash waypoint alert, for it to tell me it's about to turn to the intercept. And when the aircraft starts to turn, I'm going to change it to heading mode and allow it to complete the turn. So it will turn on to heading 075. When I do that, when I make that turn, I'll change the needles over and we should have ILS approach there. Fingers crossed that all works. So we had waypoint alert, it's starting the turn, I go into heading mode, change the nav source, and click approach, and we've got lock and glide slope in white. You see the glide slope, we're slightly high on it, but I'm fairly confident that'll be alright. If necessary, we'll just nudge the vertical speed. What we have to watch out for is it doesn't capture alt cell, that's where it gets confused if you do that. There you go, 1,000 feet to go. But as long as we capture the localizer first, which we should do. There's Lockstar.
Hopefully it doesn't overshoot it. What all about, like I've got.
There's Glide Slope Star. Excellent. So we'll put 7,000 in for the missed approach. I'll set my heading bug to 044 for the missed approach. And we're now on a glide slope doing 210 knots. Now, an A320, you're going to struggle here. You might need the gear. It'll just about do it flat 1 with the speed brake, but you're above the flap 2 limit speed, so it can be a bit marginal. See, it is depressurizing, but it's depressurizing at the aircraft descent rate, which is not very nice for the passengers.
Yeah, someone's going to have sinuses pop in.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's still zigzagging a little bit on the look.
So we'll let it fly down automatically, and we'll see what happens. I'll bring the power off a little bit, and we'll let it start slowing down to 190 knots, and then we'll get the first stage of flap out. So just a reminder, the limiting speed here is 200 knots, and what we're really looking for is a config speed. So Toto says you can do 230 knots on the CL as long as you can get to flaps 20. Yeah, that's a bit sporty for my taste. That 2500, that's an early call, and that's common at Geneva as you fly over this ridge here. It'll go away again.
I was going to say that's quite the impressive ridge, actually.
Yeah, it's substantial. So there's 190 knots. I'll take flaps 5. But we need to have the hydraulic pumps on and so we've got the fuel pumps on, the standby hydraulic and the PTU. So we should have those on. We'll put those on at 100 typically. So I was chatting and doing Moblo stuff there, but no biggie. That one, that one, that one, that one. Double check we've got the lights and the seat belts. And now it's flying, let's say air traffic asks for 180, we can do 180 quite happily with flaps 5. We could slow down to 170 or 160 depending on which documentation you're looking at. 8 miles to go. It's a very flat pitch attitude on the approach, it's actually quite nose down still. But when we go flaps, if we were to go flaps 35 at the flap 35 limit speed, it would be about 10 degrees nose down, which the passengers are not going to like one bit. Conscious of the fact I've got a Moblo line in here, so going around may be quite interesting. We'll be going straight ahead if we have to go around.
You should be fine, because if you've put it after, so the way the UNS stitches the flight plan is you'll have your approach, the end of approach gap, and then you'll have
gear going down,
the missed approach, then a discontinuity, then the airport, and we put the Moblo after the airport, so you're more than fine.
I gotcha.
You should go the missed approach without an issue.
So flaps 15, and then we'll let it come down almost until it's on top of the bar here, the first dot. A 140 should be good. So there's the final stage of flaps 35. With flaps 35, I'm going to push this button here for reduced NP landing. Don't worry about that, and we'll push the lever forward. It wants the bleeds off as well. I'll go bleeds minimum, and we'll put some power on now. So what reduced NP landing does is it keeps the props at 850, despite the fact the levers are allowing it to go to normal takeoff rating. And if I go around, it'll let the power come up. So it basically does a quiet approach, which is pretty clever. As quiet as you can manage in a dash.
I was going to say, quiet for some value of quiet.
Quiet, air quotes. The FMS is saying the next VNAV leg is invalid. That's because we're nearly on the ground. I've got gear down, 3 greens, flaps 35. We've got the hydraulic pumps on, we've got the seatbelt signs on. Cabin pressure is doing its pressure thing. I can see a runway, and it's been fairly stable on the approach, to be honest. It's not been too bad at all. There isn't an autopilot disconnect sound modelled at the moment. I don't know if that's a thing.
That's an inaccuracy, yes.
Maybe it's is it my bindings, maybe, because I'm using the stock bindings?
No, I think that's an inaccuracy. I think that's something that's missing.
Excellent. Well, I mean,
it's been fed back. I think we actually have them. It's just they're just not being.
They're just not in there. Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of following the flight directors. I'm kind of keeping the glide slope in the scan and flying the power. Because the Dash is a fairly small aircraft and Geneva's PAPIs are set for fairly big aircraft, it'd be fairly common to get 3 reds coming in here because the PAPIs are further down the runway than the glide slope by quite an amount, so that if you're landing a 747 or an A340 where the cockpit is much further forward than the gear still crosses the threshold at the required amount, at the required altitude. So, yeah, kind of flying the picture. And what I'm not going to do in the Dash is I'm not going to chop the power. I'm going to leave the power where it is, more or less. Check out the radalt on the PFD versus the calls you hear.
100. 50. 40. 30. 20.
Floaty. Smoothly with the power now. Into disc. So that was a very floaty landing, but hey, we're down. So you hold that toggle reverse to get it into disc mode. Once we're below 60, we can ask the FO to put the gust lock on. We're not going flying again. we could have vacated there, but there's nobody behind us, so I'll flick the flight spoilers, or the spoilers, to taxi. And you know what, before we leave the runway, let's have a look at the landing, because it was a bit on the floaty side, but it wasn't too bad for a dash. Better than smashing it in on a long runway, still in the touchdown zone. Let's have a look. Oop, yeah, definitely far too. I should have chopped the power a little bit. Yeah, let's see that in slow motion. Let's see those gears compress.
So I think the guidance is you need to reduce power a little bit on flaps 35. On flaps 15, you'll often have to add power instead. But on flaps 35, you need to reduce at least a little bit.
There's a little bit left in it, but not too much. Yeah, could have been smoother, but you know, there's plenty of touchdown zone ahead of us. Let's come out of replay, and we'll vacate. So double checking that the steering's still armed, we've got the spoilers off, and off we go. So I didn't need to use reverse there, just into disc mode was all that we needed to do. Check my ground speed, I'll just apply the brakes a little bit, and then off. And round we go. We'll find somewhere to park. Nope, I've not bound that view. This is the 747 exit line that I'm on there. Look at that. We didn't need to be all the way over here, but no biggie. Cool, so taxiing in, I'll have the windscreen heat back to warm up, I'll have the pitot statics off. I'll have the lights off. Taxi light on, strobes to red. And come on, little airplane, ups up. Interesting. I don't think I've ever got that far at Geneva. I think I've always vacated at the previous one. There we go. At taxiing in. What else do we need to do on the overhead panel? We probably need to start the APU. Would you single engine taxi without the APU, Amy, or would you do it with the APU?
That's a good question. On the taxi out, I tend to leave the APU on if I had it on, but I think on the taxi in, I've never actually done it on and I've been fine.
Okay. And we just need the APU before we shut down on the stand?
Yeah, pretty much.
Or we can also do like a quiet taxi where we can bring the props back, but I don't think it makes any difference, does it?
No, it won't, because you're
already in
spin
dead
pivoting mode already.
Excellent.
You can do. I believe some operators did a kind of like half single taxi, so that I have one engine in feather and the other one still in 1020.
So we just shut it down, eh? Did you say it's number 1 that we shut down, or number 2?
Number 1. You want to have number 2 on.
Okay, so it comes back. We'll go to feather. Oop. Nope. Leave it in feather for a few seconds. And then we'll shut it down. There's outer. Let's see if we can find somewhere to park. There you go, there's that classic Dash 8 taxiing in view. Watch out for Graham's gliders on the ridge. Yeah, you don't want that. There we go, this looks like a good place to park here. It's the oil pressure. Cool, let's get that APU started up, so it's that one there, and then start. We'll park on stand 64. So if you're in the chat, thanks for sticking with me throughout the stream, and sorry for the technical issues at the start. Thanks especially to our special guest Amy for keeping me on the straight and narrow with the UNS and being the resource for all things Q400 at the moment. Before we park and shut down, do you have any further questions? If you've got the aircraft, is there anything else you'd like to know about it before we go much further than this? Parking brake is set. Up here, APU is running. I'll put the APU generator on. I guess, bus time may be a thing before we shut down.
Yep.
Air bleed will turn off so that it doesn't suck in any nasty fumes from the APU. And then we'll come back to feather here. I think it's 30 seconds it's supposed to run at officially.
It is, yes, I
Yeah,
believe.
30 seconds. So here's the chrono. While that's running. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Actually.
I'm Dimitri. Any plans to beef up the documentation? On my side, yes. I'd like to write like a full tutorial for the UNS. I just haven't had the time to do it yet, and I would like to also make little videos. My original plan was like a full video on like here's to set up a full flight, and I'll definitely do something like that at some point. But I also want to do just little like 5-minute videos so you can have a look at different aspects of the FMS. For the rest of the plane, I believe the answer is yes, but I'm not 100% sure.
Excellent. Cabin crew getting a bit risky before the beacon lights even off. Oh well, yeah, maybe. Transponder goes to 2000 and standby. What have we got? That'll be the oil pressure. Yeah, so if you go into this menu here, yeah, the front door and the back door is open already, and they've already started. Have they started disembarking? No. So they've got the doors open.
Yeah, I think you have to tell them.
There we go, start unloading, and then they'll get everything disembarking. So I mean, it's getting closer to what I think would be the perfect solution of a turnaround dispatcher simulation. It's certainly, from my perspective, it's a lot better here than having to push buttons on the overhead to open the doors and that sort of thing. I much prefer the way it's working. There's a few little annoyances on the EFB, but nothing really show-stopping. Russell, hopefully it'll be on video on demand. There were a few technical issues at the beginning, so there'll be maybe 3 or 4 streams. I'll try and remove the ones that aren't the right ones and skip through the issues we had at the beginning. Other than that, there's a yaw damper still on. Look at that. Other than that, folks, that's the Q400 by FlyJSim. If I was to sum up the aircraft, my thoughts on the aircraft: A, it's a lot of fun. B, it's very easy to get into, very easy to fly. A bit hard to land on different flap settings, but it's a very easy aircraft to live with. The UNS is a brand new experience in the simulator. So if you're craving for a new experience in your flight sim, the UNS is that. It's a method of navigating that to the best of my knowledge, we haven't seen in X-Plane before. And you can hear from Amy's enthusiasm for the UNS, and you can see from the approach that FlyJSim have taken with a lot of the aircraft that they're on the right track for making this a great aircraft in X-Plane. For a launch week aircraft, it's in very good shape. We've done a full flight with it with very, very minor issues. The little things that I've shown you with it that aren't quite right, that is to make you aware of what you're getting. If you buy the product today, they are annoying. They don't affect my enjoyment of the model. So just so you're fully aware of that. Johnny Kazmatis, thanks very much. You're quite welcome. Winston, thank you. Much appreciated. And Toto, thanks very much as always. And Dirac37, first time chat as well. You're very welcome. I hope you enjoyed what you saw this evening. Amy, especially, thanks very much for joining me. It makes all the difference having a super developer like you in the chat and able to talk about the aircraft.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Good news.
I'm always up for nerding out about planes and avionics.
That's it. Excellent. Thanks very much, folks. Have a good Wednesday evening. Do enjoy yourself. Take care. And hopefully it won't be too much longer to have another stream. Speak to you later.